Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, February 2nd, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis. In today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we will head over to Allen, where he meets with Chad Dunn, Vice President of Product Management at Dell Apex, to talk about how companies can curb their cloud sprawl with a simple cloud experience, and why ease of use is a heightened priority for IT teams to navigate cloud complexity and data requirements. Then, Mike Rothman will sit down with Nick Vijay, CISO of Talend, to discuss how the security organization needs to reorient itself around values in serving its customers. We will then air an episode of the AI Times. In this episode, hosts Mike Vizard and Lee Baker are joined by Dan Jeffries of the AIIA and William Falcom of Lightning AI for a lively look ahead at the upcoming year. Then, Bonnie speaks to Zage Security CEO Duncan Greatwood about the company being selected for the first cohort of the U.S. Department of Energy's Clean Energy Cybersecurity Accelerator program. We then go back to Mike Rothman, where he sits down with Leonid Belkind, CTO of Torque, to discuss the state of SOAR, why automation is critical to scaling security operations, and how gathering telemetry and analyzing it provides data to substantiate the value of security automation. Then, Mitch will meet with Claire Drummond, Head of Marketing for Jira Software and Agile Solutions at Atlassian, where they will talk about Atlassian's upcoming event, Atlassian Presents Unleash in Berlin. We will then air an episode of Techstrong Research Review. In this episode, Mitch and Mike examine the impact of generative AI on DevOps and security, as well as talk about 5G. We will then wrap up this broadcast with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Rajesh Dinadayalan, Director of Cloud Security Services for Hitachi Vantara, as Rajesh explains why cybersecurity is becoming so much more challenging as workloads are being deployed across multi-cloud environments. Then, Mike interviews Richard Henshaw, Head of Product Management for Ansible at Red Hat, as Richard provides an update on its Project Wisdom initiative that is bringing natural language processing to IT automation. And that's what we have coming up for you in this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for February 2nd. First up, OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, has introduced a new tool called the AI Text Classifier to help determine the author of a work. Although OpenAI has highlighted its limitations, it claims that the tool can also spot AI misuses, like automated disinformation campaigns. The use of ChatGPT in academic settings has raised concern over academic dishonesty. As some school districts, such as the New York City School District, have banned its use, others are considering using it as a teaching tool. Even universities across the world are discussing the responsible use of this AI technology. OpenAI stated that it is currently working on developing new guidelines for educators, but it has not made any specific recommendations yet. Zooming out, OpenAI and ChatGPT continue to be hot topics as it receives growing attention from the public and governments and has the support of billions of dollars in investment from Microsoft. As this technology continues to be adopted, it will make us have to answer tough questions, considering academic dishonesty and other ethical concerns. Next up, Google's cellular network provider, Google Fi, has confirmed a data breach that is believed to be connected to the recent security incident at T-Mobile. In an email sent to its customers, Google informed them of suspicious activity on a third-party support system that contained Google Fi customer data. This being said, Google stated that the hackers only had access to a limited amount of customer information, such as phone numbers, account status, SIM card serial numbers, and mobile service plan details. Google has stated that it is working with the network provider to secure the data on the third-party system and will notify those who may have been impacted. Google has also stated that it would take additional steps to secure the data on third-party systems by identifying and implementing measures to prevent future breaches. It is currently unclear how many Google Fi subscribers have been affected by the breach, and the company has not yet confirmed if the incident is linked to the most recent T-Mobile hack. But the close timing of the breach and the fact that Google uses T-Mobile and US Cellular for network services suggest a connection to the hack. While on the topic of security breaches, JD Sports, the UK-based sportswear chain, has suffered a cyber attack that may have exposed the personal information of 10 million customers. The information that could have been accessed includes names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and the final 4 digits of bank cards. According to reports, the breach was related to an online orders placed between November 8, 2018 and October of 2020. JD Sports is in the process of collaborating with cybersecurity specialists and has notified the UK's Information Commissioner's Office about the situation. Additionally, the company has warned affected customers to watch out for potential scams. The cyber attack on JD Sports is part of the growing trend of cybercrime targeting UK companies, as such with the Royal Mail and the Guardian newspaper being hit in the past few months. Next up, Ford has declared a reduction in price of up to $6,000 for its electric SUV, the Mustang Mach-E. The move follows similar steps taken by Tesla, the leader in EVs, to decrease prices on most of its models. Ford believes that its price cut will trigger a price war among automobile makers for electric vehicles, but also anticipates that automakers will try to maintain their profit margins on EVs as their market share increases. According to Ford, the price cuts are part of its strategy to keep the Mach-E competitive in the rapidly evolving electric vehicle market. This being said, Nissan, Chevrolet, and Hyundai Kia have not yet announced any changes in prices. As consumer demand for EVs continues to pick up, car companies are desperately trying to get a piece of the pie, and this price cut is indicative of just that. On DevOps.com, we have an article looking at a survey of over 1,150 IT professionals that shows DevSecOps challenges. In the survey, conducted by Cisco AppDynamics, 76% of respondents believe that DevSecOps is essential for organizations, but only 43% have started to implement it. The survey then looks at several of the factors that are holding organizations back from adopting DevSecOps. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at a report estimating a spike in common vulnerabilities and exposures, or CVEs, per month. The report, which was conducted by Coalition, predicts that more than 1,900 CVEs will be disclosed each month, with 270 of them being high severity. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. Finally, on Container Journal, we have an article looking at Red Hat's update to its OpenShift platform that adds operators to make security, compliance, and networking easier. Red Hat has stated that this update is meant to make it simpler to manage Kubernetes at scale, regardless of whether it's being deployed in the cloud, at a data center, or at the edge. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I've got an interesting gentleman I want you to meet for our next guest. His name is Chad Dunn. He's with Dell. Hey, Chad, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey, Alan, thanks for having me. Really great to be here.
That's a pleasure. So, Chad, I mentioned you were at Dell, but before we jump into the Dell thing, let's hear a little bit about Chad.
Absolutely. I've been at Dell by way of EMC. Well, it'll be 16 years next month, as a matter of fact. Here quite a while. Before that, sort of knocked around a bunch of different startups here in the Boston area in the network and communication space, but I spent a lot of time in storage. And previous to the role that I have now, which is leading product management for Dell Apex, I ran the product management organization for a hyper-converged infrastructure business.
Very cool. Excellent. So you mentioned Dell Apex. I guess, we should jump on that. What exactly, for those who aren't familiar, is the Dell Apex product line?
Sure. Well, Dell Apex is really an umbrella brand that covers all things that are multi-cloud, that have a cloud-like consumption model, both financial as well as the user experience. So things like storage as a service or compute as a service, cloud endpoints as a service, all contained under the Apex brand umbrella.
Love it. Great stuff. All right. And I think, so Chad, you're talking to someone who 23 or 24 years ago, a company I had helped put together, .com, what we called an ASP, application service provider. We were Dell hosts, right? We had done a deal with Dell, and they OEM'd our hosting, and we had data centers full of Dell and EMC machines, actually.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I contributed to your children's college fund or whatever, but I don't think people realize, we tend to think of the cloud as this amorphous, no-name, kind of, off-the-shelf hardware kind of place. People don't realize, I think, how big a player Dell is in that whole cloud ecosystem.
That's true, especially in the private cloud space, where particularly with the hyperconverged infrastructure portfolio that we have, Dell's been number one in that space for a number of years now, and it continues to grow really robustly. And more, we're stepping in to support our customers as they go on this multi-cloud journey, where what we're finding is the majority of our customers have multiple public cloud instances. In fact, 75% of them have at least one hybrid cloud instance, and 90% of those actually have three or more. So a lot of these companies have sort of become multi-cloud by default.
Absolutely. Interesting, because I've been watching this space, reporting on this space, living in this space for a long time. I think we all understood the hybrid cloud, right? Everybody wasn't just going to pick up and move everything that they had in their data centers into some public cloud. So there was always going to be this public-private, at least in my work life and probably in yours, right? In our career paths, our career times, it was going to be hybrid. Multi-cloud almost snuck up on a lot of people. Like, people didn't really understand, like, why would you have something in Amazon and Google or Azure? Why would you have multiple things, like multiple distinct instances, even within the same cloud?
Yeah, it's one of those things that, as I said, by default, and the way that evolved is you've got your developers in every organization, and they're the real innovation engine that's driving the company. And their imperative is to innovate no matter where or how they get to do it. And they're going to seek the best tools and the best places to do so. And in some cases, they're going to find the best tools at public cloud provider A, and in other cases, public cloud provider B. And this is going to happen inside the lines of businesses. It's going to happen with different development teams until you wake up one day and realize you've got 25 different instances on AWS and 30 instances on Azure, and Lord knows how many on GCP. Because they've gravitated to those best of breed tools and development chains, and are maximizing their capability to innovate. And so all of a sudden you wake up and you've got cloud sprawl. You've got workloads all over the place. You don't necessarily know where they are, but you know that your bills are getting big at the end of the month.
Yep. And it's cloud sprawl. That's exactly what it is. I mean, part of it is also the whole shadow IT thing, where you got, it's a double-edged sword, but one of the beauty of the cloud is, I whip out my credit card and I spin up a few instances, no big deal.
Yeah.
And then the next guy does it, and the next gal does it, and the next person does it, and before you know it, we all have a whole bunch of it, and what the heck's going on, right? It's a problem, right? And then, so to me, that's that shadow IT cloud sprawl is hard because I just really don't have a handle on it. Then I think I'm sorry, go ahead. You were going to...
I would think it's a problem. I think it's also an opportunity. So the benefit that you get out of it is you do have your developers you have tools in their hands that are unprecedented in the capabilities that they have at their fingertips across, both public and private cloud providers. So, if you think back to, 10 years ago, we were going to approach a machine learning sort of a project. Well, there's a scarce amount of tools out there that would allow us to do that. We're going to be rolling our own to develop those kinds of things. Now, if I log into any of the public cloud providers, I'm going to find lots and lots of tools to help me innovate. So it's just an unprecedented number of assets at the disposal of our developers.
Well, the marketplaces, much like the Apple Store, really, we had phones before the iPhone, believe it or not, right? But it was really sort of the apps. It's all about the apps, right? It's the same thing in cloud. It's those marketplaces that allow you to do just about anything you possibly want. There's an app for that in the marketplace.
But maybe not so great if you're the IT operations org.
No.
Where you got to start worrying about things like data compliance, data gravity of
security in general.
Absolutely. It's a big attack surface. It's a big privacy risk. Different countries are going to have different regulations around this. So on one hand, great that the developers are out there innovating. But when it comes time to say, okay, who can really audit all this and know where all the data is, who has access to it, it's a big challenge.
Well, you can't audit what you don't know. It's part of the issue. But so that's absolutely. So that's how that piece of the puzzle to me is you can't audit what you can't know, or you can't secure what you don't know is a huge, that's a problem. That's a code red, right? No pun intended. But then there's yet another aspect, I think, to cloud sprawl, which is, okay, let's assume my IT people know it exists and we got some policies and processes in place. But the poor SOB in the finance office, when he gets that bill every month, and says, "Oh my God, how did I spend $80,000 in Amazon last month, or Google, or any of them, or combined our cloud bill last month was $170,000."
Yeah.
Where? How did it get there?
You've got to be able to not slow down your developers, right? So that's hard. But
I get it.
To get control of where that resides. Now, the way that we look at it specifically is we see both what we call a ground to cloud and a cloud to ground strategy around this. So part of the ground to cloud strategy is being able to take the data that I have and selectively move it in and out of the cloud, whichever cloud it is, but keep it within the same data services. Say, for example, if you like the storage services you get in a Dell PowerFlex, while being able to also have that running in the cloud as well as on-prem, have seamless mobility between the two. All right, I've got a fair amount of control over that data. I can audit that data. I can control how it moves. Then from a cloud to ground perspective, some of those services that the hyperscalers are offering, those can also actually be run on-prem. So if you can actually bring some of those services and then run them within your four walls or within a co-location that you control, you've got a bit more security, control, auditability, and governance of that data and those workloads. So, we're trying to strike that balance between, giving the IT organizations the compliance and controls that they need without inhibiting the developers. That's tough. It's really tough.
I think part of what makes it tough too, Chad, is we tend to think of the on-prem to cloud. It's not even on-prem because a lot of people use third-party data centers, right? They're not. But let's call it the data center to the public highway is a one-way street, right? That once we move stuff up to the cloud, that's where it resides. That's where it is. We don't think enough of, hey, you know what? We put it in the cloud for a given period of time for some reason. But when that, reason for doing it is over, the nice thing about the cloud was that elasticity. It didn't just blow up big. It also can go theoretically back small. So I've got some big thing going on. I need that extra oomph in the cloud. Yeah. But now that big thing's over, shut it down. Move stuff back to the data center.
Right? That's right. Think about that use case where I talked about PowerFlex running in the cloud. I may have the bulk of my data running in PowerFlex in a co-location, but I could have sovereign adjacency to any one of the clouds. So some subset of my data could move into the cloud for some operations for some period of time and then move back out. And
it's got to be a two-way street.
I don't have to fully commit to any particular cloud vendor, sort of democratization of the data amongst the cloud providers.
Absolutely. So I think that's a big thing. We can make a lot of progress there. People need to recognize that and live it.
Yeah.
Right? All right. What any other advice for people around this cloud sprawl issue?
Look, I think that anytime you're looking at moving workloads into the cloud or getting control of workloads that are already in the cloud, it's always a good time to start to rationalize those workloads and understand where they would run best. I mean, so a big trend as soon as cloud computing became, very, very popular was, from the CIO down, everything goes to the cloud first. And so a lot of things just got rushed into the cloud as is without any refactoring. So as you look at those workloads, think about whether they need to be refactored to be more efficient. Think about whether you actually need them or not. And we as an industry are not really good at retiring old applications. We tend to keep them around for a pretty long time, us included. And then you need to be able to do the math and have the observability to understand if it belongs in public cloud, great, but is it in the right public cloud? Do you have access to the right tools at the right cost profile, and how have you secured it? And then finally, how do you want to consume it? How do you want to pay for it? Because another key aspect of what we do with Apex is give customers the option of consuming infrastructure via subscription. So pay for what you're using, pay on a subscription term. So that gives them a lot more flexibility, oftentimes, to recognize it as operating expense rather than having capital equipment sit on their books. And gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to increase that capacity sort of on demand. So, we want to make the use of infrastructure, even if it's our infrastructure, as cloud-like and as flexible as they're used to when they use public cloud.
Fair enough. Good stuff. For people who want to go over to Dell Apex, maybe get more information on how that can help them with cloud sprawl, as well as everything that Apex is about. Chad, where can we send them?
Dell.com and plug Apex into the search bar, and you'll find everything you need to know.
Just search Apex, APEX, over at Dell.com.
Sir.
That's great, man. Hey, Chad, I want to thank you for being on today's show. This was great. I think, the whole FinOps movement has shined a light on cloud sprawl and cloud cost. And, but sometimes that just looks at it really strictly from the financial exposure, not the, just the security, as you mentioned, the security aspects, the compliance aspects, the risk and just data management and so forth, right? It's
the FinOps persona is becoming as important as the operator persona in IT.
No, I agree with you. We see it here. From where we sit, we get a good view talking to a lot of different people, and no doubt about it. Anyway, hey, man, thanks for being on. Come back and see us again. Keep us posted, okay?
Be happy to, Alan. Thanks very much.
Hey, I appreciate it. Chad Dunn from the Dell. It's Dell, their Apex product line. You can check it out at Dell.com. Just hit Apex in the search bar. It'll come right up. If cloud sprawl is a problem for you, as it probably is, you may not even realize it. Check it out. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I am Mike Rothman, head of Techstrong Research, chief strategy officer of Techstrong Group. I am joined today by Nick Biget. And it took me a little while to get that pronunciation there, so I'm happy I was able to get that. Nick is CISO of Talend, software company, does data analytics and all sorts of other, fun stuff that Nick can tell us about. We're going to talk a little bit today about what we see happening organizationally, right? There's a lot of stuff going on right now. There's, kind of folks are concerned and really worried given the fact that we've got macroeconomic headwinds. Security is not accepted from that. So we've got to figure out, really what that means. How can we consolidate some of these functions, become a little bit more efficient, and then tackle, some bigger hear concepts like, is DevSecOps really going to happen this year? Or are we still, kind of just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic? But before we kind of jump into that, Nick, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background and maybe a little bit about Talon for those folks that don't know about the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, Nick Vigier, CISO for Talon. Been with Talon for about a year now. And prior to Talon, been in a variety of different CISO roles as well as CIO roles, and really I've been in the security industry for about 22 years now, I think, at this point. So kind of seen it all, seen a lot of stuff, and just trying to find ways of making security better and helping businesses move faster, and trying to be that partner that everybody keeps wanting security to be. So,
So let's dig into that, right? Because, you work for a software company. Obviously, every company is, tightening their belt. What does that mean for your security program? What kind of things are you, doing both to improve efficiency as well as really substantiate value, right? Hard to cut budget if you're sitting there going, I'm getting, reasonable value out of these things that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tough times are the times when you show that you've been disciplined before the tough times showed up, right? So for me, it's really, we talk about that partnership with the business. How do I frame what I do as how I'm contributing to the top line, how I'm contributing to revenue versus just how am I minimizing spend and minimizing impact? Because that's just like a race to zero, right? So for me, it's, making sure that we're making the right plays, getting rid of the things that are extraneous or maybe not delivering the value, communicating to the business the value that they are getting, and potential opportunities that might exist. But then the other side of it is also trying to figure out, all these things that we buy, all the tools that we have, those vendors are changing over time as well. What you bought them for 2 years ago isn't the same thing that they're doing now, or maybe they've added functionality, but maybe you're not leveraging it. So I think it's a time to re-rationalize to a large extent. And I think some of it is, some of these players are just starting to become more like holistic platforms instead of having point solutions for cloud security posture management and then vulnerability management and then all the CI/CD tool chains and the workload protection and everything else. But maybe they're more unified platforms now that are kind of one-stop shop that could be attractive.
Well, yeah, that's, there are certainly a number of players in the space that have been buying everything that's not chained to the radiator, right? To aggregate and really build out, that platform. Is it really integrated? Maybe it's just integrated at the PO, right? And there is some value to that, in terms of, getting, enterprise license leverage and, some pricing concessions and that kind of thing. But are we having this discussion again, Nick? I mean, it's been the pendulum. And, I've been in security a little bit longer than you have, right? And we've seen this before. So it's, we kind of keep going back and then, some new thing happens and a whole bunch of companies sprout up to, do that and everybody buys it because they think that they need to. And then it gets folded into, Palo or what used to be Symantec or, McAfee, now Trellix or, Microsoft's buying everything now. So again, is now the time where this starts to make a little bit more sense because of the underlying technology platform? Is that what has really changed?
I think there are a few things that are changing, right? One is, you mentioned two of those like large entities that have just been swallowing everybody up. Like Palo Alto is a perfect example. They've been swallowing up companies for 15 years, and just becoming a broader and broader portfolio and platform. But I think what's starting to see now, and especially with the economy turning down, is that there's a lot of these smaller startups that have been innovating in little niche spaces. And you have other companies that are now able to actually afford them because of the fact that the downturn has happened. So that's one side of it. So you're no longer just like the only people I can go buy this platform from is a Palo Alto or a Microsoft or whatever. But I think the other point that you raise is a really good one, is that this consolidation around, 2-3 major cloud providers makes it so that there's a little bit more of a uniform approach that can be taken, and makes it attractive. And I think the other side of it, when you look at the user side, is there's more fluency, right? So I look at these platforms as a way of saying, how is this not a security tool? How is this an everybody tool, right? We talked about kind of that budgeting consideration, but it's also about who else can I bring onto the boat with me that needs this thing, so that it's not just, hey, security needs this thing. It's more, how do I operationalize responsibility and accountability out to everybody? And I think that's the other element. We now are getting to this point where these platforms are usable in a holistic sense, not just by security practitioners, but by just about anybody.
Yeah. Which is a couple of things. One, I love the idea of, kind of having, somebody else on the boat with you, but mostly just because it sucks when it goes down and you're by yourself. It's
Captain,
always
my captain.
Yeah. It's always good to have, somebody on the boat when Captain Ahab is,
right.
But, when you think about kind of the underlying platform that you have, and you kind of mentioned, hyperscalers, and obviously, kind of there are a handful of those, and, you can usually, leverage their services in order to, really accelerate your capability and ability to bring things to market and value to customers a lot faster. One of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is really tracking the whole cloud native initiative. And it's interesting to kind of get a sense of, is Kubernetes that? Right. And obviously it's an orchestration platform, but it's going to do a whole bunch of other stuff. It's Helm and kind of a lot of the other stuff that we're using to manage, kind of the pipelines. Is that, kind of the abstraction layer on top of a variety of different, cloud platforms that, again, enables us to start to standardize our tool set? Because I'll tell you that, so I'm working with one client right now. We're doing some work. They're a big Azure shop. And they're a big AWS shop. That's right. I got it wrong. But they're doing a data center replacement, or they think they're going to do a data center replacement, and they're pretty sure it's going to be Azure. So you got a fairly small team. They've got some reasonable AWS skills because they've been there for, almost 2 years, and they've got the tooling, they've got, kind of the processes built out. And then you're going to throw Azure into the mix. And it's just like, oh, by the way, yeah, totally different, right? I mean, kind of like English and Mandarin. I mean, totally different from, that standpoint. So how do you start to, think about both the platforms as well as the tooling on top of that?
So there are a few things here, right? One is, I think your point, like these cloud providers are all drastically different, right? You've got Microsoft lives in a Microsoft world. You've got AWS has been building on top of itself in different iterations for a decade. And then you've got Google that's like, all right, we're going to learn from all the mistakes that everybody else made. We're going to try to simplify things and make it
then drop the price. So
cloud, right? And yeah, exactly. And like, let's try to entice people over. But each one of them has a very unique way of doing each thing, right? Whether they're network ACLs, whether it's IAM, what have you. So like on one side, there are two elements here, right? One is, to your point, there's the, how do I abstract away the nuances of a given cloud platform? And definitely using something like, I've definitely seen it successful using like the HashiCorp stack of products, where it's basically, you know what, we're going to do Console, Vault, Nomad, and no matter which cloud provider I'm on, it's the same exact thing. And I can just shift workloads around to whichever provider. Now I can play negotiation games, right? Now I can, and you've now made it so that the people that need to be experts on a given cloud is much smaller in your organization, and you can still do it well, or you can, pay for consulting services or whatever. But the real core competency comes into like, how do I now, balance workloads and assign workloads and secure that overlay environment? I'm a huge fan of that. I think that there's a lot to be said, because otherwise you now, not only is it your SRE and DevOps team that needs to become an expert in each one of the cloud providers, but your security team does too.
Yep.
And so now how do you create a common visibility and a common way of seeing the world, so that you don't have to do that? You don't have to have all these jacks of all trades, masters of none, jack of all clouds, masters of none, right? Which becomes wildly dangerous. And I think that's another place where those kind of like a unified platform from a security perspective that brings together the workload protection monitoring, that brings together the cloud posture monitoring, et cetera, but like represents it in a common view, has a tremendous amount of power.
That's right. But unfortunately, Nick, that decision and those decisions aren't made in the offices that we hang out in, is it? Right. So we've got to figure out a way to, kind of talk to, again, you've had the CIO role, right? There's obviously CTO that's making a lot of these technology platforming decisions. That has what you just mapped out makes perfect sense to me, because I've been on that side of trying to do that. it makes less sense, it seems, to some of these other folks because they get enamored with some shiny object that, kind of helps them or thinks they helps them do their job a little bit better. And the security guys will just figure that out, right? And gals, and, kind of the platform engineering guys, that's their job to, kind of make sure we can be consistent on that front. It's the SRE folks to make sure that we're, up and running. And again, so I just, and that's kind of why I continue to get back and challenge, not just because I've been in security for 30 years and I'm skeptical, before I get up in the morning, right? Because that's just the way we're wired on that front. But again, I mean, I'm just, kind of poking around a little bit because I love the concept. I just have you been able to, really get that discussion going with, the folks at Talend?
So Talend, I think we started as an AWS shop. We're an Azure shop out of necessity. And then we also have, GCP environments as well. And I think that there are different stakeholders managing different environments. And it's really a matter of how do you find those common threads and try to bring them together? I've been in other roles where it was a little bit more centrally managed, again, wanted to do the multi-cloud thing. And more because of customer needs, right? So there's some customers that are like, I will not do anything with you if you're on AWS. Okay, great. I guess we have to go to another cloud provider.
Oh, you're a retailer. Got it.
Yeah, there's one of those, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really a matter of saying, how do we find a way to do that in a graceful fashion that allows us to also future-proof ourselves and show the business value over time? And I think that's where some of the conversations that we have from a security perspective aren't necessarily as business oriented. So you can't really talk about the ROI, but there's so many layers of ROI that exist in that one conversation that getting the right stakeholders at the right level to start buying into the philosophical change is super important. Start with the containerization journey, start with the microservices and all the orchestration and everything else, but with a goal of saying, hey, we could eventually plop this into a fully, abstracted stack. That'd be amazing.
That's right. No, that's great. I think that's the right approach. So now as we're talking about integration, and obviously there's integration on, kind of the platform side, but there's also this push towards integration from an organizational side, right? A cultural side. And, of course I'm dancing around, right, the terminology. But I've talked to enough people who have kind of said, this is the year DevOps, finally gives a way to, DevSecOps. I know one very large company that does, kind of pipeline stuff. They don't even talk about DevOps anymore, right? It's all DevSecOps. Is that a thing? Right? I mean, you're running these things. I mean, all your stuff runs through pipelines. You're the sec piece of it. How does that work with your dev and your ops team? And are those motions, are we overcoming some of these, cultural and really philosophical, kind of differences that have, hamstrung, this initiative, in a lot of different environments?
I think what we've done is, I think the whole thing around DevSecOps is there's kind of a democratization of the work, right, to a certain extent. Whereas firewall rules and ACLs and whatever used to be this mysterious thing that just the security team knew about. And now when you abstract that away to infrastructure as code and real DevSecOps and being able to have pipelines, you've now made it so that I like to joke that, DevSecOps is really how I codified you doing my work for me. But it really is that. It's don't submit a Jira ticket asking for a request, send me a PR and I'll take a look at it and I'll give you feedback. And if it's good, we'll merge and it'll auto deploy. It's now gone a step further. And we've actually done some of this within Talend as well, where we can actually automate the process of making the request in a human form, automatically generating the PR against the Terraform that then anybody can then within the security organization can review. It's no longer just the one person that knows how the WAF works. And then it automatically gets deployed once it gets, merged and put in. And so, but now it's fully documented, right? So now this nirvana from security of saying well, when the auditors show up, right, okay, well, show me all the change requests for your firewall rules. It's now, here's my GitHub PR history. Right. Those are all of the changes that have ever happened. Go have fun. And that changes the ballgame. My goal as a CISO and with infrastructure as code and with DevOps is I never want an auditor to have to talk to a developer or a SRE or anything ever again. Everything's in the code.
Right. And I don't want skunkworks. Right. Yep. I don't want somebody building their own stacks or loading something up. It's we got a pipeline. Everything's got to go through the pipeline. And I put rules on my cloud platform to make sure that nobody does anything outside of the pipeline.
Exactly. And we're at that reality at this point. I mean, I think if you're not doing that now, it really, it's no longer just a like, oh, hey, the, developers or the, infrastructure team wants to do this. It's like, hey, security, get on board, because this is our opportunity to become part of the solution instead of trying to make it a problem. We can really move at the speed of business and really make it so that we're making our lives easier too. We're getting there.
And what's funny is that, I was so excited when cloud happened, 8-10 years ago, because it gave us the ability to reset the deck. And then, you looked at what a lot of folks were doing, and it was the same old crap that we've been doing for,
it's the lift and shift and everything else.
100%,
like,
right.
What are you doing?
So now that you have companies, and again, you're a little spoiled, right? You work for a software company, and they get that, from that perspective. But the fact that you're kind of having those discussions, to me, is fantastic, right? And is an indication of where things can go if we remain diligent, if we remain focused, and if we are able to communicate the value of why this stuff works, right? Folks are moving towards pipelines anyway. We don't have to sell that, right? Selling the security motions within there, selling, the security team on, kind of not going and chirping after a developer, but, actually entering in a PR and documenting it in a way and proving value, right? Because the Scrum Master sits there and goes, I've got a crap ton of stuff I've got to do in the next sprint. I've got some security stuff. I've got operation stuff. I've got feature stuff. And which one am I going to do? If you're not able to, really justify that from a value-based standpoint, security is going to go to the bottom. I'm pretty sure of that, right?
Yep.
So this is great, right? I mean, this is great, and this is the problem, right? When I get on the horn with a security person, we could literally go for 2 or 3 hours, just kind of going back and forth. But unfortunately, they don't give me 2 or 3 hours to do this. Only 15, 17, 20 minutes on that front. So any other parting shots about what folks should really be thinking about as we kind of enter into 2023?
No, I mean, I think it's, as we're dealing with these contractions and everything else, it's like the DevOps pipelines and stuff like that. It's really, how do you go and find the things that don't cost money, but are going to make significant changes in the way that you do your work? And I think this is one of those areas. There's a huge opportunity to revolutionize the approach and to find those efficiencies and make your life easier. It doesn't have to be so hard.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Nick Vijay, thank you for being on Techstrong TV. Really enjoyed the conversation. This is good stuff for me. I'm excited about where, at least the vision of where you, kind of hope and think things are going. And I will totally get on board with that. So if anybody wants to hear about talent or you specifically, or, you just kind of being here because, you out of the goodness of your heart, I like to wax poetic on stuff, or is there a way for folks to interact with you?
Oh, no, you can find me on LinkedIn. Probably the easiest place to find me. And, Talent, obviously, great company for all the data integration work that we do and everything else, and help you get a hold of all those data sets that you're trying to bring together. So anything we can do to help, anything I can do to help, always happy.
That's great. Wrangling data. That is definitely a challenge. So thanks again, Nick Vijay. Really appreciate that from Talent. And we will send it back to the studio for our next segment.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Welcome, everybody. This is AI Times by Aya and Techstrong. My name is Lee Baker, and I'm the General Secretary for the AI Infrastructure Alliance, or Aya as we colloquially call it. Alongside my valuable panelists, we're going to be bringing you a session today on AI predictions for 2023. After years of slow and steady progress, AI made some massive leaps in 2022. It turned into a breakout year for industrialized AI, with generative AI models like ChatGPT, DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion bursting onto the scene and seeing astonishingly rapid adoption and progress. Now that we've entered 2023, what will the new year have in store for us all? Is the macroeconomic climate going to stunt growth? Or will we have another year of blazingly fast progress in generative AI, continual learning, robotics, and more? Hopefully, we've got the panel to answer some of those questions for you. Mike?
Hi, guys. I'm Mike Bizarre, Chief Content Officer for Techstrong Group, and we've got our panelist here with us right now. So we're going to jump into our first question, which is going to go to Daniel, who's also the Managing Director for the AI Infrastructure Alliance. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So to Lee's point, 2022 was kind of the breakout year in the sense that these models emerged and they got a lot of play, shall we say. It's not clear to me what people are using them for this just yet. So as you look at 2023, what's your sense of, are we going to see a lot more uses of AI, and what do you think that's going to look like in 2023?
Well, I think we're already seeing a lot of uses of AI, and I think we're going to see more and more. But I think it was a breakout year because not because everyone came up with something new last year, but because we've been building upon it for a very long period of time, and a lot of pieces came together, from a giant data set to having fast enough chips to the right algorithm to the right funding, right? And so, I can tell you right away how people are using it from a generative AI standpoint. It was interesting at the IA. I had some awesome graphic designers who do work for all the events, and they did some work before the holidays, and it wasn't the best work that they've ever done. They're usually awesome, but it was right before the holidays. I'm guessing they kind of mailed it in. So when I got back from the holiday, took a look at it, I said, you know what, these aren't great. So I went into Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, and I started iterating on some of the ideas that I had, and then I fired those back over to the designers. Then they did iterations in their tools, plus used all of their design sense for lettering and where things should fit properly on a page, and kind of moved it together and came back with some brilliant designs. So I always think of these things as centaurs. A lot of folks tend to think of these things as like, every day the media is wasting ink with like, oh, all the jobs will be gone. This is total nonsense, absolute total nonsense. It's centaurs, right? It's humans and AIs working together, and that's what the workflow is going to be. And then at the same time, Maria, who runs operations for the IA, started working on a newsletter, and she speaks like 4 or 5 languages. She's a brilliant human being. She knows logically how to make something flow. So what she used to do in the past is she'd write the newsletter, and then I'd do all the editing because I've been a writer for 20 years. In this case, she did the write up. She knew what she wanted to say. Obviously, it's not as dynamic as it could be for a native language speaker. So she put it into ChatGPT and said, correct this and make it much more dynamic. I had to change like 4 words. So the question becomes like, are people using this correctly? Like a lot of times people are interacting with these tools like it's a human being on the other side. That's incorrect. It is a model that you program with words. And we're going to see more and more use cases like that as people start to realize how you interact with these things. And with the huge funding that's starting to come in generative AI, OpenAI getting 10 billion, other folks starting to pour money in to it, we're going to see more and more of these use cases. I saw an artist do it turnarounds, right? So they were, you have a number of artists who've been upset about it, but they're not really looking at how the tool is going to work. It's not just type a prompt and it's going to do everything. That's also not how it's going to work. I saw a professional artist train up a fine-tuned model where they do the fun part, which is design the character, and then they trained it to do turnarounds, which is where you have to draw it in 5 or 6 different positions. Totally boring work, totally tedious work. And they train the model to do their turnarounds. That's how you're going to see. You're going to see these kind of workflows where the AI artists, AI and folks are sort of working together, do things more rapid iteration, these kinds of things. And it's going to be very exciting. We're going to see more and more money and more and more models kind of pour into it. And then as more people get to it, it's going to refine all these things so they get smarter and smarter. It's going to be a very exciting year.
Dan, you raised some interesting points and kind of use cases and some examples. William, as CEO of Lightning AI, how far can we take generative AI beyond kind of some of the examples that Dan cited there? Are we ready for text to video, text to 3D, text to music? Will I be creating my own symphonies? And if so, what's the quality likely to be? Is this going to be prototypes, or am I going to be kind of publishing this for the world large?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a research question, right? It's kind of like how general is the approach to like the fusion that powers all of this, right? So far it seems to be pretty general, which is cool. So we're kind of starting to see evidence of that in audio. I think like it's the answer is yes, but it's a matter of time, right? Will it be this year for everything? Probably not. Will it be for many things within the next 5 years? Probably. Like I think that's pretty reasonable. Quality is always going to follow a pattern, which is like the first time it comes out is going to be okay, and then that whole year is going to be about getting it to be really fantastic. Remember, like everyone is kind of aware of stable diffusion today, as of like last summer, but this is a paper that was published 2-3 years ago. It's already been a while, right? It's been in research for a long time. OpenAI was kind of the first one to apply it, and then stability and so on. The big thing that changed this year specifically was just that it was like built in the open source. That's the majority of it, right? And then now you have people using a lot of it as well. But the ideas go back a long time. So probably the next things are already out in papers. They're in conferences right now. You just won't see them in the public for another few years, and they'll follow that pattern. But yeah, I'm pretty excited. I think it'll definitely apply to more than just this. You definitely will see like text to video. Probably this year, I would assume text to video will happen as well. Like I don't think we're that far from that. Text to audio started to kind of happen last year. I think this year will happen more. Yeah.
All right. Hey, Mitch, you are a principal analyst for Techstrong Research, and you're also CTO for the Techstrong Group, which publishes DevOps. And I'm asking that question because we're going to be talking about MLOps. And from your perspective, is MLOps kind of just a set of best practices that are similar to the best practices we've seen for DevOps, just applied to machine learning models? Do you think this will be the year where we see more structure in how these models are created? Because it sounds like we're going to have, I don't know, tens of thousands of these things. So how will they be built?
It's the asterisk ops phenomena, out of the DevOps world is actually a positive thing because it talks about applying some of the principles about how software is being created now. And whether you say AI ops or ML ops, typically what we mean by that is more than just applying machine learning algorithms into software or an AI model into software. It's the platform and environment for managing those things. Because you have to manage an AI model, like you might think of it like a data model in a database, but much more sophisticated. And there are generations of that and learnings that are applied to it and different things that you use those things for. But there's also a data platform that can be either the foundation or the driver for that. So what I see happening in software, we're just again issuing a report around observability in cloud native applications and how AI is showing up. We call it AI-driven observability. And it actually, people or in our survey and our data collection and talking with users of tools, observability tools and operations groups are seeing some changes that are impacted by AI, specifically around kind of the toil part of it is managing alerts and quantity of them. But more importantly is as our software gets complex, really understanding the insights that they need to connect all the dots, because we're talking about internal apps and SaaS applications and things that are all tied. So, and that's just one avenue. It's interesting because we have so many advances happening in parallel, whether we're talking about generative AI types of things, we're talking about machine learning and applications. For, I guess, 3 years ago, we would have talked about autonomous vehicles and vision processing and image processing and all the things that are happening, though. Those are all moving forward in parallel. And I think that's part of the reasons why suddenly AI has gone from a vendor tagline to actually showing up in products and in the field, as well as the research that's happening.
Daniel, do you want to add to that? Do you see a need for some sort of defined set of best practices for ML ops, and how do we kind of bring the models and the software development processes together?
I mean, look, I think there's always got to be best practice in ML ops. I think ML ops is changing like dramatically right now. I think it's going partially through a contraction, and we're seeing. I talked a bit about this in the age of industrialized AI, where you see, some folks are didn't get enough traction, and some folks are just not going to make it through for this year. And I think part of the reason is that the perspective is wrong. Like what we thought was that everybody was going to have 100 ML engineers and everybody was going to be doing data science, right? But what they actually forgot is that machine learning is actually really, really hard. And so what you're just never going to see the average company training up a gigantic foundation model or something like that. It's too intensive in terms of compute, in terms of data, in terms of people, right? It's one thing to do some XG boost and some churn prediction and all these kinds of things have incredible value. But I think a lot of these tools were kind of tuned towards trying to do everything, like the citizen data scientist doing some kind of some data munging and some basic predictions, and also it should work for training on 2,000 GPUs and distributing it to billions of people via inference on A100s. Those things are going to split, right? You're going to see things that kind of specialize in one or the other, and not really. There's going to be, I think, a lot of these companies are actually going to end up serving the foundation model companies and what I'm calling AI-driven businesses. And those are businesses that have AI at the core of their business model, right? And so if you think about Boeing, they have AI at 5 different levels of their business, but their business is still just making airplanes, right? And they could technically do it without it. But if you're generating photorealistic people for fashion catalogs online, and you are able to take, generate a whole bunch of people and show, 100,000 pieces of clothing in every possible permutation, you could never do that by hiring enough people and taking the pictures. You'll still hire people to do the big photo, the big hero photo shoots, but that's an AI-driven business. I think a lot of those companies are going to start to serve these AI-driven businesses that have AI as a first, and they're going to, those practices are going to start to tune those things. I also think the vast majority of people are actually never going to interact with where they thought they were going to interact with it. So we thought folks were going to be interacting at the ingest data, clean data, do experiments, train a model, deploy a model, observe a model. That's still going to happen at some level, but most people are going to move up the stack. It's kind of like when you get Apache, PHP, MySQL, and then you move up to WordPress. Yes, you could make a website well before WordPress, but once you move up to WordPress, it makes it easier for people to do that. And then you have another layer of abstraction with drag and drop, kind of editors for a terrible designer like myself. I'm a good designer, but not a great coder. So I think most people are going to interact with models at the fine tuning stage, adding a little bit of code, expert code, adding a little glue code, adding embeddings, go ahead and talking to the API and building kind of chains of things like that. That's where they're going to start to interact with it at that kind of higher level. So I think we're going to see a definitive set of changes in the industry as these things kind of start to play out. And again, not tomorrow, but over the next 5 to 10 years, as this all starts to come together, we're going to see more specialization, and most people are going to abstract up instead of working at the lowest level. That's like working in assembler. Most people are not. You still need assembler, and then you still need C for building operating systems. But most people are going to code in Python or Rust, something like that, at a higher level of abstraction. It's going to be the same thing with MLOps, in my opinion, as well.
It's interesting what you're saying there, Dan. So if we're seeing like the fuel of this is AI-driven businesses, and Mitch is attesting to the ongoing maturity of MLOps and MLOps best practices. William, what do you think we can expect that techniques, tools of AI that might either re-emerge or re-establish themselves within the next year?
Yeah, great question. So first, I just want to say I really agree with what Daniel was saying, right? I think that's kind of been the stance of our company, where we started kind of trying to do a lot, and then we realized that you needed to have very individual pieces for individual workflows, right? But I think that kind of leads into this, because it means that the techniques that are going to come out again, I think it's going to be you're going to treat a lot of these models as embeddings, which is kind of what we're doing today. And you're still going to use the other kind of traditional models, XGBoost, classifiers, whatever, right? Now, generative AI is a little bit different in that you're not classifying something, you're synthesizing something. So a lot of those methods won't really apply. But there's probably a collection of methods that haven't been introduced yet that will be introduced in the next few years. That probably, and we're kind of seeing it already, which is more fine-tuning stuff, right? So you generate something, but how do I make that thing be a little bit more tailored to what I'm doing? So I think a lot of the research is going to go into how do you fine-tune faster and better, right? And to that point, do you need to train a foundation model from scratch every time? Probably not, right? You probably need a better fine-tuning technique. And so I think a lot of people are going to start getting into those kind of things. So I think if I were a researcher today, if I were starting my PhD all over, I would probably start looking into fine-tuning techniques, and probably would be done with my first part of it in the next year, and then there'd be like some crazy other stuff that would come out afterwards, right? Because the field moves so fast. But yeah.
Well,
if you want what?
No,
sorry, go, Mitch.
Curious about your perspective. One way to look at this is people talk about ML ops, but also an evolution to model ops, which is kind of taking it from the data scientist research, people hiring data scientists within their businesses, to more of an enterprise platform or enterprise capability that now applies the governance around models, the management evolution of those that kind of managed by the broader kind of IT or CIO kind of organization. Is it you think that's going to continue to be an evolution of kind of a broader management of ML and AI? Is this model ops idea, or is that a fad that will pass?
Yeah, so I think this whole model ops thing, and to some extent ML ops and all of this, like I've always been bearish on this because I just think it's like a temporary thing, right? It's like we took ideas from software engineering, we applied them, we said we needed them. But like Daniel said, like, are you really coding in CSS, raw CSS or jQuery right now? Not really. No one does this, right? Like you're not coding in assembly. So we moved up to the stack. I think that the problem in the space is that the people who get into machine learning tend to be pretty good engineers, or like usually researchers that want to understand every detail about everything. And they just won't let go of the lower level abstractions. They just want to know everything. But it's like, do you have to learn everything about a car before you go buy it? Not really. Like I don't have to be a physicist or know anything about fluid dynamics, right? So at some point, the world has to make this leap to say, hey, you know what? The generation before solved it well. Let's build up, right? Because I think the real value now is applying this to industry and going forward. So I think all of the stuff like where model ops comes into, I guess, really, it's, I would say, more financial services, where like you really want to understand what happened to something, and auditing, right? So if your thing is subject to like a regulatory agency and they need to understand why you did something, then all of that is going to come into play, right? But less so about like, I don't know, about using this model or this. There's just like a lot of hype terms, in my opinion, right? And I think it's going to be a lot simpler than that. And it's going to be very tailored to each person, really, like at the end of the day.
So let AI be AI, right?
So Daniel, following up on that, is there going to be kind of a two-tier play here where we're going to have data scientists who build the initial model and then they expose that out maybe through some sort of interface or an API or whatever it may be, and then that's how we democratize it, and that's how where the average individual is probably going to interact with it the way you described it? And is that how the whole thing is going to play out? Or, ultimately, will we democratize this to the point where I'll just talk to some sort of AI machine to create an AI model for my personal use, and I'll just describe it verbally, and it will magically happen?
I mean, so that it's turtles all the way down. Look, I think there's a lot of turtles all the way down in AI. I'd argue that from the earlier thing that model ops and all those things eventually just become kind of a subset of IT, right? Like we understand like how to run certain things in production. We need auditing. We need to know where these things are. Like we need to know whether they're scaling. There's different things like training that we haven't thought about before, right? That are important, and serving things on GPUs are different too. But when I absolutely, so I think that becomes kind of those terms become a subset. Now, in terms of the data scientists that we talk to, for instance, Stability, we're on the CIO. Us and OpenAI and Anthropic and all these other foundation model companies, they're all competing for the top data scientists at this point. It's like there's essentially this huge, there's a huge amount of need for like tremendous talent, and these talents are incredibly unique individuals, right? I mean, they get paid a tremendous amount of money because they not only can they just look at the papers, like they can understand the paper, understand the math, but that's not enough either. For the truly creative ones, you have to be able to combine your own ideas, to be able to combine other ideas from different domains, right? And this truly unique data scientists. So the average company is not going to be hiring those people. They're not going to be able to afford them, and those are the ones that, like you said, are going to create these kind of large scale models to get more and more generalized. I don't like the term AGI. I think we get there at some point in time in the future, but I like generalized AI. In other words, models that become more and more generalized for across a subset of domains. It's like a cat intelligence, right? The cat's never going to blue screen. It's going to be able to jump and hide in boxes and eat and do like a subset of domains. So you might have, robots that are able to like clean the house and do dishes and whatever. And the neural net is able to kind of like continually learn, not forget the things that it already knows, learn new things, right? So you're going to see these and be trained quickly as sort of zero shot learners. So you're going to see this kind of thing. And because of that, you're right, the average person is going to interact with it in a unique way. And one of the things I've liked, about being a stability is I came from a long line of open source, for instance, at Red Hat. And what's interesting is when great engineers, regular like engineers, coders, and average creative folks, and all these folks kind of get their hands on something, there's another level of creativity happens. So there's at one level, if we only end up with AIs hiding behind kind of an API that we can only interact with in the way that like they tell us to do it, that kind of sucks for society. Because some of the things when I look at some of the real creativity is I saw people, for instance, train it up on all kinds of like wave files that indicate music, right? And they fine-tuned a model like that. They said, well, music is just these wave files. So can I train it up on that? And all of a sudden, instead of having to create a whole music bot, they're like creating one that has voices and guitar and background and everything. And they're no longer trying to mix it together. Somebody just thought of that, right? Somebody who is an engineer and a creative person. I look at some of the fine-tuned models that are coming out of the space where people are taking like 10 different models and saying 15% of this one and 10% of this one. And all of a sudden now I'm getting photorealistic humans or like, fantasy characters and, cyberpunk or whatever perfectly with hands that are awesome and great poses 85% of the time. So again, it doesn't even need to be super generalist, right? It's like, and that creativity comes out of it when people are doing it at an individual level and saying, wait a minute, I'm Hyundai, I just want to generate trucks. I'm just going to fine tune it to generate these trucks. And it's going to do that almost perfectly every time. So we're going to see more and more creativity. I've seen it used for synthetic brain scans and things like that, something that the original designers never think about. So the more these kind of things get out into the world, and traditional coders and traditional engineers and just smart, creative, interdisciplinary thinkers get their hands on it, they're going to take it in a new direction. And they're also going to be better at compacting the model, refining it, making it, run on smaller and smaller memory, running it at the edge. That's not something the data scientists are ever going to think about, or the original folks are ever going to think about. But the people who are running it on like, trying to get it to run on a desktop GPU or on your phone or whatever, they're going to have that knowledge to do it. So I think there's a lot of exciting things, and that's where most people are going to interact with AI. And that's where it really starts to get actually just embedded into lots of applications and exciting. And then, we forget what it is that it's AI. It's no longer like, well, I'm consuming AI. It's like, no, I just talk to the phone and I ask it to make a recipe and it does that. And I no longer think about it as AI because it's a solved problem.
All right. Even though I can't carry a tune, you're saying that I might win a Grammy someday. So that's good.
You might. They'll fine tune your voice with like better pitch. I think they already did that with auto tune back in the day. But but now maybe it even gets easier. And we just kind of visualize you in, and then turn you into a 3D model, and then put you as a hologram next to Tupac up there. It'd be awesome.
Start working on your now, Mike.
Yeah. Well, as we all wait with bated breath for Mike's debut album, let me take what Dan said there about kind of collaboration and kind of how more models become shared, the more original the outcome. We're all kind of engineers and tech enthusiasts here, so that's great. But what about the CEO of a large enterprise? How does he foster the type of collaboration that Dan is talking about to generate original ideas, to ultimately create profit for his organization? William, what's your take on that? How should a company in 2023 engage that is not one of Dan's AI-driven businesses?
So I think, so a lot of what we do is we help companies kind of like apply AI and bring it together, right? We sit kind of at the level where we power a lot of these models, right? Stability AI, for example, was using our tools like, Stable Diffusion, like PyTorch Lightning and all that stuff, right? So we have the luxury of seeing across many companies and understanding like how they work. And I think that the main trend that I see with companies that are not like AI first, and AI first meaning like a stability where they have their own researchers. I would say like probably this is the year of like software engineers, where like all you have to do is just know how to code and be creative. So I would open it up to other people that are not like data scientists or ML people in the company, like people who are like experts in your domain, right? Who are like the ones who are creating literally the artists who are building the things. If you're like a furniture company who's designing that stuff, right? So I would open it up to those people and basically give them like very simple ways of interacting with these like UIs, right? And like little apps and things that they can kind of play with and generate things. I think that's really how you're going to be able to leverage the creativity. I just, again, I'm a researcher. I focus on AI research. I don't do, I guess there is creative work, but I'm not like painting here all day, right? So I'm probably not going to be the person who's going to be able to come up and tell you like the best way to like leverage your particular business assets for this one particular use, but partner me with someone like one of your creatives and we'll be able to do that, right? So that's what I would encourage all the CEOs to do is like step out of your engineering domain and actually get other people in there because they're the ones who have the ideas. They haven't been able to do things with them before, right? Like, remember the time where you could now, I don't know, Squarespace probably, right? Where like suddenly everyone could have a website. Now you saw an explosion of things, right? So I think that's really the key is make it super, super that simple and allow people to build with your things, right? And I think that's largely what we focus on as a company is giving companies the tools so that they can build such apps so that their non-engineers can actually leverage systems like this as well, right?
So does that mean decentralized AI, or do you have 100 experiments going on throughout the business?
I mean, look, I think you must start. So there are some requirements first. You must have data. There's like some stuff you must have done beforehand, right? So make sure you have that first. Like I think if you try to jump the gun a little bit too much, it'll be harder. Although with fine tuning might be easier nowadays. Like you may not need a lot of these requirements. But no, I wouldn't just like go and like try 100 things just because it works. Right? It's like my advisors said during my PhD, like I was at Facebook AI Research, and now you have all the compute in the world. What do? Well, you don't go try a million experiments. You don't do that, right? You're smart about what you're going to choose, and you try a few things. So I would still argue like try some POCs, test a few, 2 or 3 things out, but make sure they're from diverse groups across the company. Show some success first, and then go and experiment more because like. You're going to want to understand like where's it kind of taken off, right? This is probably with recession coming. It's probably not the years to like sit here and like do 100,000 experiments just to see what happens, right? So I would be a little bit conscious of that as well.
William, it's already the beginning of the year and everybody gets their crystal ball out, but pretty sure that somebody will declare that 2023 is the year of AI. But this has been a long time coming. So as you look back, what do you think were some of the seminal moments that led to all of this that maybe people don't appreciate? Or because we've been at this for years, it's not just something that came up overnight, but I think a lot of people are surprised by it. But in your experience, what do you look at and go, gee, that was a breakthrough technology. We just didn't recognize it at the time.
So I'll start with kind of an obvious one. So 2018 Transformers paper came out, right? That basically talked about what Transformers were. And that was like fall. I remember I like started my PhD and then suddenly there was like pre-world, the world before Transformers and the world after Transformers. Transformers is what GPT is based off, right? So fall GPT, Transformers comes out. Suddenly you can now do transfer learning, right? You can learn something in one data set and generalize it to a different one. That's not something you could do before with like text, right? So in research, this completely changes the game. Then OpenAI takes that model and then they scale it up, right? And that scaling is what we know as now GPT. So GPT 1, 2, 3. That really proved to research and the world that like you can actually just throw more data, more compute at it. You don't have to actually fundamentally change the math, right? Transformers paper fundamentally changed the math. Then all we've done since then, not all, we've done a lot more, but like the main contributions have really been scaling of this. How do you just grow these models, get more data, train them for longer, right? And that becomes GPT 1, 2, 3, and so on, right? Along the same timelines, I didn't follow the diffusion work too closely, but I think the paper started coming out around 2018, right? It was like a while back. Then they start to bring it into like DALL-E, then you start to see it. The thing that we were using before that was GANs, right? So there was like a lot of hype around GANs for a while because they could generate things, but they were super blurry, they weren't great. So the second we started using diffusion, we're like, oh, interesting, this works a lot more. So I think that when the world switched to diffusion, that was a big seminal moment there. And then probably the third one, I'm really limiting to like the last 3 years because there's been many other seminal moments in AI before that. was when we open source, when we had a version of Stable Diffusion that was open source, right? That really changed the game for people as well. And that was this summer. And that's, I think, what you're seeing with Explosion today, specifically, right? So I think probably I would assume the next big explosions like this are going to be when we have a pretty good, like, we've already done, so Whisper, right? So we've done voice to text. We've done text to image, which is great. Text to video is going to come next. We don't have anything yet for really good, like, text to, like, speech, right? Like, there's not like a great system for that yet. So I think that'll be the next thing that happens. There's some inklings that is probably already happening. Probably will happen this year. And then I just want to understand, like, can you just keep scaling GPT forever? Like, literally just give it more data? Like, the math hasn't changed, right? So that, from a research perspective, it's interesting. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit more like research heavy, but like, what I'd like to see is actually, can we get better results with smaller models? Like, I don't actually think going to like 1 trillion parameters is really the goal. Like, what if you could go down to 2 billion parameters or 100 million and still get a really good model? This unlocks the ability to deploy these models on the edge, to put them on headphones, to put them on cell phones, like all this stuff, right? When these models are massive, it's just really hard to actually productize. So yeah, I think probably this year will be a good year, just like last year was, I guess. And then look, all of this work, Transformers, built on a lot of research for many years, right? So there were many seminal moments. I think attention mechanism was a big one in the research world. Obviously, convolutional networks, VAEs, like there's a lot of stuff that has really enabled us to get here, right? So this is just a culmination of like 30, 40 years of research for sure, maybe more.
All right, cool. Dan, you want to add to that and anything? And what's in your crystal ball?
Yeah, look, I think I think you get, text to image and then image to 3D, right? Or text to 3D, and these kinds of, you get this whole workflow pipeline kind of happening at once. I think you hit on a number of different things that have been happening. I do think we get to trillion parameter models, and I do think they're going to be quite interesting because you start to get these emergent properties out of them. The other interesting things, you start getting more and more chips. You get faster and faster chips, right? So it's like we're already starting to see a competition now. You've got servers building gigantic wafer-sized chips to train, trillion parameter models. It's still experimental, but even if they get bought out, nobody's going to let that tech disappear, because now it's like, now you don't need to go over the network with InfiniBand. You're just kind of going over on the chip with hundreds of millions of cores on there, right? And then you have everyone in their world kind of getting into these new chip designs. They even have Intel now coming out with the Gaudi 2 architecture, which has a different architecture than the A100s. They will beat the A100s. I'm not sure where the H100s come into it, but now you're starting to see more players come in. So you're going to see faster and faster chips, which are going to commoditize all these models. Like, there's always going to be a bleeding edge of like super powerful models that can only be run on the top of the line things. But as the years go by, the chips, whatever the future of Moore's law is, right? It's, whether that exists or not, the chips are going to get better, faster, more diverse. It's going to get easier to run those models and compress those models, right? So they kind of start to trickle down. And you're also going to start to see just, it's the interesting thing is the combination of techniques, the chaining of these techniques, right? And so it's like you have, Anthropic doing the constitutional AI, for instance, and then saying, okay, cool, we're going to give it these principles, and then we're going to have the AI, have conversations and then score itself on whether it fits those, and then do like automated reinforcement learning. So that's a combination of techniques in automation. Or, when I use the automatic 111 or automatic 1111 interface to do stuff, they've kind of, the open source community has done amazing stuff, kind of jamming all this stuff together. So I was using a model to kind of generate, posters for my workout room. I wanted to have like old school, like propaganda style posters of like, people working out or whatever. And so I was trying all these different models to make it work. There's a face scan in there. So you can check the box to do face scan to restore the faces. So one of the things is when it scales up, it loses detail, which is why sometimes you get these mangled hands or the face doesn't look right, because it's fine when an arm is small, but then when you like scale it up, you can figure out the general pieces. But like the hand, maybe not a face. Well, they have a face scan that just restores the faces, looks perfect. And then another upscaler, it changed to that, right? So it's the chaining of these things that starts to make these things look incredible. And then we're gonna have more breakthrough techniques. We're gonna have more sort of zero shot learners. You're going to get more of these sort of generalized models. When you look at what Google's done with their robots in their office, which we can now like open doors, clean the office, do windows. What do? They just jammed Lambda into that. They already had the robots and they just weren't that smart. that they jammed Lambda into it, which by scaling it up, it had these emergent properties of like chain of reasoning, logic, all this stuff. I also think, and one of the things we're experimenting with is I think you're going to get like people who go all in on like a neural symbolic logic. Like they're going to go find the best math and like logic data set. They're going to train the heck out of the model on that thing. And then they're going to like they're going to consolidate those weights and freeze them. And then they're going to train up the gigantic model. And then all of a sudden, when you get like maybe new emergent properties, I think you're going to see continual learning research start to happen more and more too, where you're able to say, look, we did this one thing. If I teach it to, recognize dogs, and then teach it to recognize cats, it forgets how to recognize dogs. You're going to start to see it do that. And then you're going to get to a point where these true foundation models become a moat that you can't really beat. In other words, like if I'm trained on a trillion, images over time, not just fine tuning, because fine tuning eventually destroys the model over time if you go too far with it. Continual learning would allow you to keep adding stuff to it. And all of a sudden you get these sort of smarter and smarter models over time. But I think really the chaining of things is exciting. And then kind of doubling back lastly to the things you were talking about, where did enterprises consume it? I think enterprises consume it from the AI-driven businesses, from SaaS services and things like that. Like people who build like what we're calling kind of the tier 2 companies, and not because they're lesser, but just because they're most likely going to take the foundation models, embed them into an awesome interface or something that does something very specific for a business, drug discovery, or like generating music or doing turnarounds and they're going to get the audience for that, right? They're going to they're going to have the end audience for that. And then some of them will level up to generating their own models or fine tuning their own models but that audience is going to be super important. So you're going to see all these companies kind of developing the tool sets that enterprises are able to utilize in their environment to say, wait a minute, I'm now augmenting my process of materials design, or like I'm augmenting all of my non-native speakers. I'm going to be able to like edit the stuff so that they have a tool that allows them to speak in like easier in another language, et cetera, et cetera. These kinds of things is you're going to start, something's going to come in to analyze all the legal documents really quickly and go, wait a minute, you're going to have to fight in 20 different jurisdictions based on all the all the things you signed without realizing it. You should try to consolidate these, right? So you're going to see more and more tools built in that utilize this, and more people are going to just be serving that enterprise at that level, and that's going to be really, really exciting. And again, it's not all this year, but the seeds are already there. And what we talked about earlier is, this seed and this seed and this seed and this seed, and then somebody comes along and goes, wait a minute, if we put the airplane together just like this, it flies. Right, but the propeller and the engine and the wings and the materials, all that stuff is there. It's the seeds. It's just when it comes together is the question. And that's when those exciting moments are, and when we really start to expand as a society and when the technology expands.
So we've got generative AI. We've got improvements in compute, be that new chips or quantum computing, heaven forbid. We've got AI-driven businesses who are kind of crafting these models and these interfaces. Mitch, what does this mean for the heartland of the AI Infrastructure Alliance, the independent software vendors who are helping build this infrastructure? What does it mean for those companies who typically are talking to enterprise to help build out their infrastructure? How do you think their message will change, and how will generative AI impact the ML software ecosystem?
Well, let me answer it in two parts. It's a great question, Lee. At the CEO, the board level, the C level in an organization, one of the big reasons why they fund research, either externally or inside their own organization, but especially externally, and I'm literally quoting you kind of what I've been told, which is, I'm paying you so I don't get surprised, either because I lost an opportunity or because my competition took advantage of something I didn't know about. Your job is to make sure I don't get surprised. And where there's an opportunity, help me determine if that's something we can leverage in our business. That's how business people look at this, is we don't want to get our butts kicked in market because we were sleeping, but we also don't want to miss an opportunity. But we can't live on the bleeding edge on everything either, right? They're business, they're not researchers. So I think, so the second part I want to answer this from, there's this saying we kind of use is, there's a tipping point of technology where we kind of emerge out of talking about it, and we don't talk about it anymore because it's just sort of in the fabric of how we do things. I'm not saying researchers don't talk about it, of course they do, but in the general population. So, and it's one of the reasons why there are all kind of specialized or novel or different applications that happen. Same thing happened in security, whether it was blockchain, right? Suddenly that's the magical technology that's going to change the industry, and it has made some changes, but not everything. It's going to have same thing. We're talking about generative AI. We're talking about natural language and translation into different languages as one novel application of that. To me, where it shows up in the enterprise is from all the people taking a Udemy, Coursera class on using ML algorithms, which are really largely data analytic kind of algorithms in their Python code or in their React framework or those kind of applications. That's where the everyday developer, software engineer it's going to show up there. So I think that's the translation or the transference that we see. It's all happening parallel, and it is going to be one thing that suddenly makes AI everywhere. It's going to be lots of different applications of it. The one thing that's unique about AI, though, is, and it was sharing with you, I started my journey in AI quite early, kind of back in the Lisp and Prolog days. And the whole idea was mimicking human thinking. And that still shows up in our thinking today about AI doing what a human could do, artistic kinds of things, creative kinds of things. Which are all very interesting. There's also I just want to throw a lot of data at this and do unsupervised or supervised algorithms against it to do specific kinds of applications. So there's different ends of that spectrum. And I think it's more of kind of the robot that's doing your work for you, but in a business application, right? What can I do with all this data? What kind of insights, what kind of novel uses of that data that are going to help me deliver better customer experience, a new product, gain market share, that kind of thing. That's the money end of what turns that part of the crank, and the research dollars are what gets those ideas started and flowing in that evolution.
All right, guys, we only got a few minutes left, so I just want to kind of end with a quick short question, a little prediction from everybody. Going once around, William, we'll start with you. They said the wise man is able to expect the unexpected. So what's that unexpected thing that we should expect?
The unexpected thing that we will expect. I think we're not going to displace all these jobs, like we said earlier in this call, right? I think everyone's like super scared of this, but I think it's just going to augment a lot of people, and they're going to be better. So maybe what we can expect is normal non-experts at whatever their craft is actually being able to operate at like a closer expert level, right? So kind of like normalizing the skill sets that are distributed across people. So like your best artist, your best painter and your kind of worst painter in a team may actually be able to kind of like get a little bit closer to each other now, right? Same for writing, same for these kind of things.
All right, Daniel.
I mean, there's always like an unobtainium, and that's the most interesting thing. So whenever I think about the future, it's like a Monte Carlo analysis. It's like these are like the strong branches, but it's based on like what we know now, right? So like there was a cartoon that I just tweeted from 1923 that showed the cartoon dynamo, generating like cartoons in the year 2023, right? So. And you go, wait a minute, it kind of nailed generative AI, but the way it's taught was very analog. It's like this pen drawing on a page from the like analog brain telling it what to do, right? So there's always like the things you can't see, and what they couldn't see were computers and the rise of digital nets and all these kinds of things. So I think the most interesting things are right now, it's all about the data. It's all about scaling up. It's all about doing these things. But there could be some kid working on a whiteboard somewhere, right? Who's like figuring out how to like train something the way you train a squirrel or a dog, or the way you train, a human being. If I take the kid out in the backyard and throw the ball to him, for a few weeks, he'll figure out how to catch that ball and throw the ball back. May not, go to the major leagues, but will know how to do it in a very short period of time. I think if somebody will, the thing you always look for that changes the trajectory of things is that one thing, that zero shot learner, that mimic learning, that like new technique that's fundamentally different that changes the game. That I think is the thing that you have to try to anticipate. So what you do is you build for the technologies that we have right now, but you always be prepared to drop everything and kind of like shift in the new direction when you can. Not overnight because you have these sort of legacy, but you have to be prepared for when that stone hits the water and makes this huge splash and changes it. You want to look at it and say, like, did that just change the way we do everything? I think we're on the verge of a couple of techniques like that really accelerate how artificial intelligence learns and how it kind of contributes things into society. And that's, to me, the thing that gets me excited. I'm always looking for those things out there.
All right, Mitch, real quick, couple of predictions, and then Lee, take us out.
All right. My prediction is we'll continue to hear about sort of the human-centered, and we'll hear about the data-centric applications of AI. And I think the more things that translate into kind of data-centric, make that cross that chasm, help all of us. And we'll still be fascinated by the ChatGPT and whatever the next thing is that kind of falls into the either the augmented AI category or some variation of that. So it's interesting times to be in this industry for sure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys. For what it's worth, my prediction is that Mike's debut album will go platinum.
Double platinum. Double platinum.
But I think everybody else's predictions are going to be much more useful. So let's plan to revisit in a year and see where we got to. It remains for me just to thank our panelists, William, Mitch, Dan, and to Mike for helping coordinate today's show. If you've liked and enjoyed today's content, please like and subscribe. We have additional content that we've created with Techstrong, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Please join us either at Techstrong TV or AI Infrastructure Alliance.org. Take care.
This is Techstrong TV.
Thanks for joining us on Techstrong TV. I'm Bonnie Schneider, and joining me now is Duncan Greatwood. He is the CEO of Zage Security to discuss renewable energy and cybersecurity. Duncan, it is so great to have you on.
It's really my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
That's great. Well, just last December, the U.S. Department of Energy's Natural Renewable Energy Laboratory announced the first cohort of its Clean Energy Cybersecurity Accelerator program, and Zage Security was selected. So congratulations, first of all. And tell us how it's been going. It hasn't been that long, but what have you been doing so far? Yeah, well, it's a very active program, actually. It'll be all done by the end of March, this first phase. So it's launched right into it. Renewable energy is an opportunity to improve resilience and security. And it's also a risk that security might get worse. So we kind of have to balance off those two things. And really what the program is doing is simulating some of the risk situations that happen in renewable energy infrastructure, and then bringing a few of the newest and most innovative solutions and dropping them into those environments and sort of saying, well, if those new solutions were there, would the hackers be stopped, or would they still be able to go and do their bad work that they want to do? So that's really what's going on right now at NREL and at the facilities that they provide. Well, just to backtrack a little, can you tell me a little bit about Zage Security, how you got started, and what you're working on in general? Yeah, you bet. So Zage Security is a cybersecurity company that targets what we sometimes call real-world operations. And that means anything where there's a physical aspect, the things that we rely on every day. How do we transport ourselves? How do we create our food? How do we create and use energy? And that's a new area in cybersecurity to a large extent. Until a few years ago, it wasn't really an area of deep activity. But of course, in the last few years, it's become very sensitive area. We do rely on those things every day, and there's a whole bunch of bad actors who are either trying to extract ransomware from private companies or attack things from a national security perspective. The war in Ukraine has intensified concerns, and hacks like the Colonial Pipeline hack of 2021 was perhaps a bit of a warning sign for the whole of that sector that they needed to start paying more attention to it. So Zage is taking a new approach in that industry. Historically, cybersecurity in that space has been about keeping the bad guys off the network, so just not allowing them in at all. And then secondly, if something did go wrong, there would be detection solutions. So you'd, like having a video camera on your house, you'd have a detection solution. So if somebody was rootling around, then you might have a chance of spotting it. Both those approaches are kind of broken down because the bad guys do get on the networks fairly regularly. Just knowing that they're there is useful, but of course, we'd much rather just stop them being able to do what they want to do rather than just detecting it. And that's the approach that Zage is bringing, that we are providing what we call a fabric, which is really just an overlay of software components that we drop into the operation, and which is there to make sure that nobody can do things that they weren't authorized to do. And so we kind of take control of access and interactions that are happening between the different systems and different equipment. And we impose this method of authentication and authorization to control what's happening that previously didn't exist. And that's super relevant to situations like renewable energy and like what NREL is doing, of course. In renewable environments, there are often lots of little solar farms, little wind farms, very distributed. The old way of doing energy, a few giant power stations, was a very different kind of a model. And so when you have these distributed environments, that introduces a whole bunch of new risks. They have to interact with each other in new ways, and they, sometimes they're working. It might be windy today, it might be sunny today, it might be that you're using nuclear energy today. They're constantly varying, and so it's a very complex set of controls that has to exist, and Zage is really here to help us solve those problems.
That's a really good point that you mentioned, where you have these environmental factors that come into play. And in the wake of climate change, where we're seeing more of these extreme weather events, how has that affected cybersecurity and posed new challenges for you?
It has. Well, I think it's a multi-layer answer to that question. So firstly, it's accelerating the push for renewable energy, as we all know. And so we have to make sure that the resilience of the grid is increased, not decreased, when we do embrace renewables. I think the story today on that is mixed, quite honestly. Sometimes it is increased, sometimes not. There's also direct effects on the grid when there are either weather events or wildfires or any of the other consequences that can come from climate change. You probably remember a couple of years ago, there was a big ice storm in Texas, and they don't have too many ice storms in Texas, but once in a while they do. It was very intense. It went on quite a long time, and they had to bring in tens of thousands of outside technicians from outside of the state of Texas, and give them access to the Texas infrastructure to help them fix it. Well, you can imagine if you take 50,000 people who've never had access before and give them access to your digital infrastructure, there's going to be some of them who have malware on their laptops, and maybe they don't even know it's there, but they do. And so you're kind of, in responding to weather events, you're actually exposing a whole bunch of cyber risk in that process. And that increases the need and the intensity of the urgency of, let's make sure that one person who has malware on their laptop, that they can, worst case, maybe they infect one substation in the grid. They're not infecting every substation in the grid, not allowing kind of a digital contagion to happen across the grid when those things do end up jumping into the system.
Yeah, and so keeping this security in mind and looking at these new arenas where we could have more threats to security, how would you go about, how do you go about testing these measures, particularly in the energy sector?
Yeah, so there are multiple levels of testing that go on. There are commonly defined sets of standards and tool sets that a company that's buying cybersecurity will run through, and they'll test for vulnerabilities in the security solution itself, and also whether the security solution is able to block attacks against the thing that it's trying to protect. In real world infrastructure, the baseline is often very low. So there may be equipment with no password at all, or it may seem to have a password, but actually very easy to bypass. And so what Zate is bringing is the ability to overlay on top of what we might call that legacy equipment or legacy architecture, modern cybersecurity methods. So just as if you want access to your bank account, you might have to sign in with a password, and you might have to provide a second proof, like proof via your cell phone that it's really you. Well, we can impose those kind of multi-layer protections even on top of these older pieces of infrastructure. And so a test range like the NREL is providing will run through all of those kind of attacks. Is it resistant to a password attack? Is it resistant to a so-called MFA bombing or MFA exhaustion attack, and so on and so on. So they have a whole suite of things that they run through. They're also looking at the real world resilience of this thing. So if your solar farm is disconnected from the outside world, does it continue to work? Can the security measures work locally, even without being able to refer back to some central security point? That kind of resiliency is just as important as the cyber kind. You don't want cyber to kind of bring things to a halt just because it's lost a network connection or any of the other problems that can happen in day-to-day digital life. And so the testers also run through those kind of scenarios and making sure that it'll work in practice as well as in theory.
Has there been any challenges, unexpected things that happened in your development, especially working in renewables?
Yeah, I think the cybersecurity is constantly throwing up new challenges. It's the nature of hackers that they're inventive people, and it's quite a entrepreneurial community in its own strange way that people are coming up with new ideas and new approaches all the time. I think for us, for a long time, there was kind of doubt in people's minds. Did they really need to take these strong measures? And as I sort of hinted a couple of minutes ago, I think only in the last 18 months has the whole industry sort of shifted perspective and say, you know what, it doesn't matter whether we're an oil and gas pipeline or a solar farm, or we're manufacturing packaged foods. We are critical infrastructure. We are under attack, and they've shifted their mindset and technical term that sometimes used a zero trust approach. So they're not going to trust you just because you appeared on a network or just because you have one laptop or what have you. They're sort of adopting these much stronger approaches, and I guess with our cyber perspective, in some ways it surprised us that it took them so long to get there. That it took them a while to realize that they had to do it. But I think the flip side of that is how fast people have been able to move, especially in the last 12 months, in really kind of starting to aggressively head down that path. And companies like utility companies, they have a well-earned reputation for a stately rate of progress on many issues. That's kind of how they operate by default. But whether it's renewables or many of these other areas, you've seen people who kind of previously might have taken 10 years to adopt a new approach, kind of saying, hey, you know what, we want to get this rolled out in 2022 or 2023 or some quite rapid timescale.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting you meant the pacing has picked up. Now, I was reading about your background and how you've previously worked in leadership roles at Apple, Topsy, Postpath. In your vast experience in this cybersecurity world, have you ever seen an acceleration like this happening, where there has to be this very up-to-the-minute progress expected in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think we have seen this loop before a little bit. I think in the last time it went around, it was really more focused on purely digital environments, though. So there's a distinction here between the world of the carpeted office building. Imagine you're working in an insurance company, really you're processing documents backwards and forwards. And if you wind back 15 years, then many of those environments were similarly poorly protected. Once you got inside the firewall, you could do many, many things that were bad. That sort of switch into protecting individual assets, individual pieces of data that happened in IT 15 plus years ago is now happening in critical infrastructure. It's a change of mindset for sure. Every customer we talk to, it's a different state. Some of them have already fully embraced it and they're hammering down the path. Some of them are uncertain. Does this apply to me, and do I need to do it? And others of them, honestly, are still in resistance mode a little bit. I don't want to do this. I got to figure out I'm okay where I am. The lessons of the last cycle, I think, in the IT world as opposed to the operational world, the lessons in IT were eventually everybody kind of embraces it, and people are pragmatic and they find solutions like Zage that let them do it in a practical way, and it's not quite the nightmare that they perhaps thought it would be when they first started looking at it. Really, for these businesses, it's a requirement now, and when a requirement exists, a hard requirement like this one, then solutions begin to make themselves known, of which Zage is certainly an important one, I think.
Well, that is true, and it's definitely coming more to light, as you said, with all different sorts of threats posing on organizations more and more each day. And Duncan Greatwood, thank you so much for sharing your insights from Zage Security. Congratulations again on the Accelerator program. You're going to have a very busy next couple of months, I'm sure.
Yeah, no doubt. It was my pleasure. Thanks for talking.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong TV. Thanks, Duncan. We're going to have a lot more coming up.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey everyone, and welcome to our Emerging Challenges in Distributed DevOps panel. I'm Taylor Thomas. I am a Director of Engineering at Cosmonic, and just a quick introduction about who I am, what I kind of background I come from. I'm a recovering infrastructure engineer. I do a lot of backend engineering right now, a lot of it in Rust, did a lot of it in Go before. I was a core contributor to Helm for a very long time. I did a lot of code, like writing of the code of Helm 3. I've done a lot of things with Kubernetes, built Kubernetes platforms at 3 different companies. Really kind of jumped on the containers and Kubernetes bandwagon way back at the beginning. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll just hand it off to Bailey so she can introduce herself as well.
Hi, my name is Bailey Hayes. I'm a director of open source at Cosmonic. I have recently joined Cosmonic. Before that, I wore many different hats. I think I'm probably coming more from the dev side than Taylor, working on distributed applications, mostly written in Go. But I am a recovering Spring Boot developer, so there is that. I guess we're all recovering in our own ways, right? I'm also part of the team because I have been a WASM champion from the very beginning and started working with its even precursor as early as 2012. So been in the space for a while and really, really love talking about it. And one thing that Taylor and I both have been thinking a lot about is around software delivery, especially when it comes to WASM or WebAssembly. And this is where I usually pass off to Taylor to, as our common joke is, peddle his bindles.
Yeah, so that came about because I'm often talking about another project that I am a co-creator of called Bindle. That is basically a new way of storing artifacts, and it's really just meant to be this idea of what we call a silverware drawer for for software, because most of the time when we put things together, like they're not necessarily the exact same thing, but they belong together. And so that's what Bindle is. It is really just meant to be like object storage for a whole new way of doing things, specifically in WebAssembly. And so we call that aggregate object storage. And the idea is that you store these closely related things together like you do in the silverware drawer. You need your forks and your spoons sometimes. Other times you just need a fork and knife. Sometimes you need those fancy soup spoons. All those things are the kinds of things that we work with Bill. So yeah, we've been in this space for a little bit. Like I created this a couple of years ago, part of what is called SIG Registry with Bailey. It's part of the Bytecode Alliance. So we're working towards defining how we want to store WebAssembly artifacts and how they can be basically recomposed together depending on your needs. So it's kind of an interesting space we're in, but that's just something else that we're kind of both working on right now.
Yeah, so you're probably wondering, I mean, I guess everybody has stood up a Docker registry. So when you kind of think about that in terms of WASM, it already works, right, with OCI. There's several different ways of making that work, but that's already available. What we're kind of talking about is rethinking the software supply chain from the very beginning. And how do we understand all the capabilities that a WASM module is allowed to do from the very beginning, so that, say, the threat level of a given module way before you ever run it. You know that it needs access to sockets. You know it's going to make requests over HTTP. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't do any of those things, and it's just super safe, and it's just a single unit of compute. Being able to understand those types of aspects of a given program opens up the door for a ton of cool new opportunities. But I think maybe we should take a step back and talk about, hey, this is DevOps everywhere. Why are we personally motivated to work with DevOps? And I'm just going to throw that straight to Taylor.
Yeah, so this is a subject I'm rather passionate about, having been part of the whole DevOps explosion that came around with Kubernetes. And I always do this as kind of a story of what happened here. We kind of have had this pendulum swing back and forth. And if you go back to like the late 90s and early 2000s, you had this thing that where developers would create their applications, package it up into the trash bag, and throw their trash right over the wall. And then the ops team would just be responsible for it. That was a common refrain. I've actually had been on teams even later than early 2000s, so where they were still doing that. Like someone would just throw the application over the wall, and then they just had to handle it. And that was kind of the old style of doing it. It was all kind of the ops team's deal to run that. And then we came around to Kubernetes and Docker, and everything swung like completely the opposite direction. And you ended up with this idea of, well, now as a developer, I have to know what cluster I'm running on, where my cluster is, which CRDs I have installed, what databases I expect to have, all of this stuff that you had to know about. And then the ops people had to worry about, or DevOps people, as they were called by that point, had to go and say, well, I need to know exactly what this person's running, and I need to know what their memory requirements are. I have to know what dependencies they have. And it's just a big mess because now everybody has to know everybody else's job, so everybody does it poorly, the section that isn't theirs. And so that's where we've kind of like swung back and forth on this like pendulum of dev and ops. And we're talking a lot about how this works in this distributed like DevOps and what things are going to do. We're going to really focus around like WebAssembly and how this can kind of bring it back to the middle to allow developers to focus on the things that matter to them, and platform engineers, SREs, DevOps people to focus on the things that matter to them, rather than either siloing them entirely or having everything and everybody be everybody's business. And so we're trying to do that with what we've seen in WebAssembly. We're going to talk a little bit about that today as we mention a few things.
Sure. So as a developer, I know that it's basically my responsibility to have a good idea how to build my application and create that final release artifact. Let's say it's a Docker container. Maybe I also have to build it for multiple different platforms, since that's maybe the requirement of where we distribute. So I package all those things up. I know, general ideas about how the system works and what it's going to run and what conditions it'll run under. But I would say that from a general perspective as a developer, I'm going to be like, Hey, Taylor, how do I do cross region? How is this supposed to work cross cloud? You help me now, right? And then what do you say, Taylor?
Yeah, that's a classic. Like when we were talking about this, as we were talking about how the kind of conversation we wanted to have, we were thinking like, well, like no matter where you run something like DevOps, SRE, those kind of things are required, no matter where you're running them. But like in today's paradigm, no one can actually do those cross cloud or even cross region things very well. There's plenty of people who have data centers that they still want to use for various reasons. And I personally used to always think cross cloud was a pipe dream because I would ask people and I'd say, well, what are you doing with this? Like, why do you need cross cloud? Because we want cross cloud. And I'm like, but why? And no one could ever really give me a good answer. So I kind of dismissed it out of hand. But then I ran into banks. And then you start having these weird regulatory requirements and things to make sure you don't have specific types of downtime and other things. And you start to see where heterogeneous environments made up of all sorts of different things that could be brought to it are a big deal. And right now, if a developer comes to someone working on an SRE team that says, here you go, you're in trouble. You're like, oh no, like how am I supposed to do this? Or there's a huge lift to actually make that work. And in the current paradigm, that doesn't work very well. The problem too, and I mean, I'm sure you have commentary on this too, Bailey, that when we get to like the way we do this distributed stuff right now with Kubernetes, it's just so difficult to do it cross cloud. There's no way to, and that's the thing. It's a hard problem to solve. But it also like Kubernetes is kind of the way people do distributed nowadays. I mean, there's other things out there. We ourselves use Nomad quite a bit, but there's too much of the shared knowledge that we've talked about before between the two teams of like dev versus the DevOps side. And Kubernetes should have been exclusively the domain of platform teams. And somehow along the line, everyone got involved with it. And so now, like I mentioned before, devs have to worry about where these things run, like if they're region supported, which things are installed. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen some similar stuff before, the different platform work and things you've done.
Oh yeah, totally. You know, I was gonna say, come on, Taylor, don't diss my CCAD, because I did have to, you know, learn how to swim, maybe tread water when things are happening in prod or dev, and making sure that, like, you know, hey, you know, where do my logs go? Did my sidecar get attached? Is it sending up the right stuff to Prometheus? All that kind of stuff that if I waited for a very overloaded platform team, I'd be waiting a very long time that I could fix myself in just a few minutes. And there's a lot of things that I could do from the developer side to make sure that I'm exposing the right things. So if I'm constantly living and breathing, you know, all of the open telemetry aspects of my application, that's really important. And that is something, though, that the platform team should provide, but it's where I got to meet them in the middle. So doing all of that is really important, but is it not easy, right? And there's just, I don't know about you, but I just feel like there's so much even arcane knowledge to how to do things. And when somebody doesn't have like a Kubernetes alias, a kubectl alias, I say kubectl. I just want to go ahead and say that out there. I want things to cuddle. If I can't type K tab and there's not like auto completion, you know, it's just like how are you living your life? But if you try to take a new dev that's just getting started in the career and expect them to be productive in this new world that we've built, it's very hard. And just trying to explain to them why we're doing all of this, you're like, yeah, you know, we might be causing a lot of pain for ourselves here. And after I've onboarded enough interns and early devs, I've definitely been thinking there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, that's something I think we've all experienced at this point. You just see this, especially as you start to bring these people on board. I did a lot of this when I worked previously at Microsoft, like working with customers, and getting people to grasp it was such a large amount of effort. And so the thing we just kind of pointed out here is like really the way we do distributed right now kind of breaks down when you get to cross cloud, cross region, those kind of things, and also anything that can truly make it distributed, not just across multiple nodes, but across like any type of device. And with Kubernetes, the other thing that you have is like anytime you do something interesting at all, I think we've run into this. We kind of have like, your own CRDs, your own controllers, your own scheduler extensions, your own, like you might have a specific way you run your data queries, and that all has to be shoved into this box that people have somehow designated as the only way to do distributed programming. And so I have found it really interesting that like we kind of actually not only did we create a world that's hard to bring new people into and hard to like there's so much shared knowledge that's needed, but we also created something that is actually just very difficult to bring current systems and current ways of modeling things to, especially in a distributed way, because sometimes the things you're trying to bring are already distributed in their own special way. They run across multiple areas or things, but they work differently than the way we're trying to run them or connect them to.
Yeah, and not only that, but a lot of people think that because they move things to the cloud, it's going to be easier or cheaper, and those are really can be myths. Yes, it's more scalable, it's more reliable. You get all these other properties, but if you lift and shift what you currently have, which I experienced at one of my previous roles, it was very expensive. And that is why we actually had a mission. Why I'm a recovering Spring Boot app developer is that I had to go from finding a way to go from many different Spring Boot applications that use reflection and magic. And they were sitting at like, I want to say 750 megabytes was about the average for a single microservice, and convert 300-ish of those to Go, and that got down like 17-ish megabytes was the typical size there. That vastly reduced the cost. But if you were just comparing that to, say, our bare metal version of the same thing, way bigger, way bigger. I don't know about you. Have you dealt with some of that?
Yeah, that's something that we run into quite a bit. So as part of our work at Cosmonic, we've been talking to people about like their clusters and what they're using. And honestly, the numbers we get, and just from my own experience having run Kubernetes clusters and things, is utilization of a cluster is between 40 to 60%. And so even if we take Kubernetes out of the equation, it's going to be anything similar that's based on Docker. Like you're not going to use all of it, but you have to have all of that capacity there to make it distributed. And just due to the amount, I think about it as well. Like if you're doing something in Java, Java is obviously the worst offender here, but think about anything, even stuff like .NET and even Go to an extent, where you have a runtime that's compiled into the language. Now, Go is obviously way down the totem pole on like how bulky it is because it's not that big. There's a lot of cool work that's gone into the Go runtime. But when you actually look at these things that have been done, like if you stop and just think about it for a second, you are running an application. I mean, this is something that's just like a simple API. If you're at a bank, you're like writing an API that might calculate an interest rate or something like that. It could be a little service, or you could be adding to a service. And so this little service that maybe if you boil it down to its core business logic is a couple hundred, maybe a few thousand lines at the worst, you're running in a bare metal machine somewhere. Like it has to hit silicon at some point. And then on top of that, you have a virtual machine. And on top of that, you have Kubernetes. And inside of that, you have Docker. And inside of that, you have the whole runtime for every single little microservice or thing you deploy. Like that is a crap ton of stuff you are bringing along with you. And that's like one of those big problems about running these things distributed, is that it becomes very hard to actually like run like between just the cross region. You start throwing in like cross-platform and other stuff that you start running into, and it's just difficult. Like it's heavy. It's more. You're bringing much more along with it than you actually need to, and that causes a lot of like. Even if you are running at capacity, if you're running at capacity with one of these things, you're still probably overutilizing by quite a large amount, because instead of having, once again, I'll use Java because it's the heaviest here, you could be fully like up to 90% utilization on your cluster, but more, I would say about half of that is just repetitive JVMs being spun up. Like at that point, you've lost a lot of the benefit. And even like when you go down to things like Go, which is much more lightweight, you're still bringing a runtime along for every single one of those. And you start to see there's a lot of inefficiencies there that really matter once you get to scale and to all that. But I mean, this is where both of us have experience in containers. And so I'm just curious, like, Bailey, I know you have plenty of experience with these kind of container things in the past. Like, what have you kind of run into as you've tried to do these things?
Yeah, some of the things that my platform team asked me to do was to pack all of our services into one pod, or like maybe 3 pods when we previously had 300. And I had pushback there because it's like, hey, when these things burst and they auto scale, they actually have very different scaling properties. So when I'm thinking about this from a distributed aspect, I expect things to be very different. But then there's like but this is requesting this amount of memory, and then you get into the whole Java argument of, well, yes, but this is how much I need to start it with the runtime. But when it's actually processing requests, it's a lot higher. So this is why this is what the max limit is for a reasonable run. And so those are things that's again on both sides of that fence, of that dev and opsy fence. But other things that I've been asked to do is like constantly find different ways to rebuild my final release artifact. So working at an ISV, we had a very typical enterprisey request, which is, hey, we have this set of blessed base images. They might be based on Red Hat UBI, which is fantastic. Maybe you just got a contract and you need to support a different architecture, like maybe Power 9 from IBM. Or probably most people who are listening right now, they've gone and rebuilt their stuff for ARM. That's really common. But at least where I was working at, we had dependencies that were easily a decade old. Nobody was working on getting those working on new architectures. And the work of just turning the crank on hundreds of different projects is super expensive, especially projects that really are not changing beyond like, hey, we got a CVE here, like let's get these things out because we need to, and less so on like actual features or fixes. So just that, the like screw, if you can imagine turning a crank and just hearing it go is definitely how I would describe many weeks while working at a large enterprise that's trying to do microservice work. And that's one of the reasons why I joined our team. But how about you, Taylor? You got anything you want to add on that point?
No, it's just Docker really came like we've talked about a lot of the benefits of Docker. Like, yeah, Docker is so easy to just like get something into it and then run. There's benefits there, but we kind of deceived ourselves when we said, oh, Docker can run anywhere. And it can't. Like, I'm just going to be blunt and honest there. It can't. Like, yes, a lot of really smart people, some of whom I even met, like made containers work on Windows, but they work fundamentally, like you cannot run a Windows container in Linux. And then you can't even run a Linux container that's built for ARM, like you were saying, or like any of the other types of processors for a Linux x86 processor. It doesn't work. It's not cross-platform. And we just pretended it was. And so that's one of those things that I've just run into constantly, because when you find a requirement for that need, or you try to do stuff like move out towards the edge and you start getting more bespoke processors or things that have to run really tiny, you just run into issues. And so honestly, I think this is this frustration, and Bailey, you could speak for yourself in agreement or not, but I think this kind of is what led both of us to WebAssembly and to Wasm Cloud, which is our open source project that we help maintain. And so like those are the things that really led us there, because I mean, there's just a lot of frustration there. We've really improved where we came. Like, we don't have to deploy things on bare metal anymore, or log into a mainframe. Like, we don't have to do that, and that's great. But we've kind of just like brought the baggage along with us, and it's caused some of this like pain that we've talked about, especially running distributed applications. And so that's where I think both of us kind of came to WebAssembly, was from that frustration that we saw with running these things for real and in big environments.
Yeah, I guess, I'm realizing that we didn't explain what WASM or WebAssembly is. We're just like, it's awesome. It's a technology that we both work on. So I'll throw out my version of what is WASM. And WASM, also known as WebAssembly, is a portable compilation target. So if you can think about compiling things to a .exe or a DLL or a .so, that is a .wasm that any WASM-enabled runtime can run. And so one example, WASM runtime is your browser. In Firefox, it's Spider Lightning. In Chrome, it's V8. Basically, all the major browser vendors support it and have since 2019 was when it was a recommended web standard, but many had support way before that. I actually shipped my first WASM app in 2015. So it's been around in the web space. And because it's been around in the web space, and web was really that first platform that was targeted, a lot of interesting and unique properties were required of this new bytecode that many others didn't have before. It had to download really fast. It even supports actually streaming compilation. So as it's being downloaded, it can be actively compiled. It also has to be secure. If you think about taking arbitrary code and running it in your browser from any random website on the web, you've got to be able to make that so that it's safely sandboxed. And it also needs to be fast, because if you go on a web page and it's slow and sluggish, you navigate straight off always. So the combination of all of these is very valuable. I forgot to mention the cross-platform aspect. So we were just riffing on containers and how you need to create a container for each host architecture that you're targeting. Say it's ARM or Windows or Linux x86. And with WASM, you don't need to do that. It's a portable bytecode format that you can distribute. It's really the runtime. So you have to have a runtime that runs on those different systems. But there is a plethora of options as far as runtime. So, one doesn't run Docker in the web right now, but with WASM you can. For example, that's one place. On many different edge type, like Whammer is one another really great one, WASM Edge, that target IoT devices. So there's just so many that are out there that we can choose from. Gosh, I feel like, I could talk about WASM all day. It's my favorite thing. Is there anything that I should have said about it as the hello world, Taylor?
No, I think you captured the hello world pretty well. I just want to kind of point out one of the features of WebAssembly that I really, really enjoy. It's kind of like one of its most, not killer features, but one of the most important things it brings that a lot of people don't notice the first time they learn about it is this plethora of runtimes. This isn't like what happened at the beginning of Docker, where you have, is it Docker, or do you use Cryo, or do you use Rocket, or and it's like, who's gonna win? There isn't a who's gonna win question here, and I find that very, very refreshing. Number one, and number two, very good for the technology. The whole idea is that you can run on any one of these things. Like I said, there were some for like smaller devices. There's some that work on that are more like general purpose. And you can choose how things run and what you run it with at runtime. So you're not only choosing optimizations at runtime, but you're also choosing the runtime at runtime. And so those are all really cool features that allow for some really awesome tweaking and optimization that you don't normally see with other technologies. And really just the rest of it, I think you covered really well. It's much smaller. It's much more compact. It runs everywhere. Those are just features for me as someone who's done a lot of this cross-platform support and many different things. So much nicer than what I used to have to do. So I think the 101 level, this is what WebAssembly is. I think we covered pretty well.
So, and that, I think you highlighted why it's so great for when you're talking about distributed applications, because nowadays the edge is you. It's your device. It's your laptop. It goes with you wherever you go in the car. So having runtimes, having software that can go from exactly where you are on the edge to the cloud and at any scale, that's really what we're targeting. So how do we make it so that we're not creating these different bespoke solutions across all of these different platforms and making it so that we have something that kind of ties these together in a distributed way?
Yeah, I think it's really just, that's right there is if you want to come away with one thing, just know about WebAssembly giving you those features. But the whole panel, the whole discussion that we're supposed to be having around this panel is around the distributed nature of things. And I wanted to kind of mention a little bit about that, because you already mentioned this idea of the edge. And to be clear, the edge is not just one use of the edge, and it's a very good use of the edge. It's like what you see with things like Cloudflare or other CDN type of stuff, where it's literally doing very little amounts of processing, or like your HTML and JavaScript, and serving it from something that's very, very close to the user. But you could also think of this as data closeness. You can think of this as which type of device, because the edge is, like Bailey said, your laptop or your phone. Like, that's the edge. It's kind of become a buzzword, and I understand why, but it is, it's just very, very broad in what it means. But we really mean, like, distributed means from the cloud to the edge at any scale. That's what we mean by distributed. And we like to say that WebAssembly can run anywhere from a light bulb to a supercomputer and anything in between. And based on what we've done so far, that holds fairly true. You can run it pretty much anywhere. And so because we have that, like one of these things is just thinking about all the different devices we can connect. So anyway, that's what I think of like distributed. So that's something that's really important to mention as kind of the follow-on to what we've been talking about with Awesome.
I have a story I want to share. So that gives you the idea of what we mean when we're talking about distributed and the edge. So we were at KubeCon, gosh, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, maybe it was even 3 weeks, time's flying, in Detroit. And it was sort of like the middle of the week. We'd already had WASM Day. We'd already had several talks and panels and all kinds of stuff that we had to do. And then we had booth duty yet again. I think this was Wednesday or Thursday. So I'm walking in, it's like right on the dot, 10 a.m. when we're supposed to start running our booth. And I catch Taylor and then Dan, who's our infrastructure lead, kind of like hunched over a device. It was a Steam Deck and just sort of like giggling. And I was like, okay, what are y'all doing? Like, we're supposed to, act like we're, booth attendees now. And I look over and Taylor tilts his Steam Deck and it's got our logo on it in ASCII art. The console was up. And then what they showed me just like completely blew me away, because they were like, look, I've got it running on, I have an actor deployed and running on my Steam Deck that is also connected to GCP, AWS, Azure, even Oracle Cloud all at once, which, then we all were like a little giddy. And a lot of people came by and they're like, what are you doing? We're like, well, they apparently had this discussion at a bar last night and thought they would just try it. And one command later, it is working. And that is pretty cool. Do you want to describe what that feature is?
Yeah, so this is a feature that we call super constellations at Cosmonic. It's also enabled by Wasm Cloud. We mentioned Wasm Cloud a couple times. I'm just going to bring it up here that it's a CNCF-owned project. We are the main and principal maintainers of it, but it is an entirely open source project. We work off of an core, and Cosmonic is the hosted version of it. And you can do this with either one of them, but with Cosmonic, we made it super easy. You install our command line tool and you literally run one command. I do not have to install any other software on my Steam Deck. Now, Steam Deck is a little bit more fully featured than what some people would consider like an IoT device. But even then, I didn't do anything else and I just attached it. And just having it be able to have things in 3 different clouds and stuff connected from a conference floor with terrible conference Wi-Fi that's serving up requests back out to people on the internet is just a little bit mind-blowing to actually see in action. And so we absolutely loved that feature. And just that idea is that they help solve this idea of everything can be wildly distributed across any type or system you can do. You could bring your own servers. You could bring something from a data center. You can bring devices that have sensors on them. You can bring your laptop. It doesn't really matter. And that's why those kind of things are so cool, because we really wanted to have that. Developers just don't care about those kind of details for us. This kind of has a lot of ramifications for how we do software development. Developers don't need to care about these details, and they shouldn't need to re-architect. Right now, and it's always been this way, but I think it's even with the speed of how fast, cloud native development has generally been associated with a lot faster cycles of development. And so you run into this more often. You write your application, it's running, and then it's successful, and people are like, well, now we have to make it so it scales across 3 different things. And so then you have to rewrite it again, and you have to change your code and how you're doing. And that's not really developers are good and generally enjoy writing new features or creating new things. They don't want to have to go figure out which flag to turn on this library so that they can connect to this thing. That's just, some people do. It's different strokes for different folks. We know that. But overall, like most developers that I've talked to, and I think a lot of us have talked to, that's kind of the thing. They don't want to have to worry about it. You have to re-architect your application every time. You have to rewrite your application every time you have to re-architect it. And so that's no longer a thing here with what we've set up using Wasm Cloud, is that you can write your code, and instead of you needing to know exactly where it's going to run or how it's going to connect to, you're able to then just completely re-architect it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, I think. But really, this is a huge impact on software development. This is what we were mentioning at the beginning with the whole pendulum swinging from one side to the other. It brings us back to the middle. You're not having to, like, developers no longer have to care about things like, where am I running? How many am I running? What kind of things am I going to be running across? You don't have to worry about that as much. There's always little details. There's always gotchas in software development, but for most people, like, that's not something you really have to worry about that often. And we try to abstract that away.
Yeah, for me, the thing I saw was, wow, okay, so I have the exact same WASM module running on a Steam Deck as I do on an x86 machine in a different cloud, running, also in AWS, Azure. In AWS, we're actually using super cheap ARM devices. I've also been able to use it now running off of my M1 Mac. And to me, it's the same thing. And it has the exact same behavior characteristics, which is like performance, memory footprint, all of those things. It's extremely predictable. So as a developer, that's just gold, right? As far as what I can design and architect for a distributed application. So often that's like the thing that always bites me in the end when I'm thinking about working on some of these things at scale. But one of the other things that we haven't dug in much yet is also the way that you can write your software and write your applications that's a little bit different from what maybe a lot of people are used to. And that's where with Wasm Cloud, again, open source CNCF sandbox project, it eliminates non-functional requirements out of your code. So that's another thing that we didn't hit on much when we were talking about what goes into just your pod, right? And let's say in my pod, I'm running Spring Boot, and I've got some type of runtime, maybe it's Java, and I'm also running my own HTTP server because that's what most of these microservices do. And guess which piece of software always has the CVEs? It turns out it's the thing that communicates over the network, or it's the thing that is looking at certificates. Like 9 times out of 10, when you go and look at the CVEs that you have to rev, like, mission critical, like we need to get this out in the next 24 hours, it's there. And it has nothing to do with my application logic. I could care less which HTTP server you want to deploy my stuff on. Here's my CRUD application. This is my API. Like I want to give you that information, and I want somebody else, or, even if it's me, I want somebody to pick the best thing and run with that. And that is what Wasm Cloud does. It's a feature with capability providers. And at runtime, we link in the things that you need. So the thing that is actually in my Wasm code, like the logic there, I just say, I'm coding to a contract. I expect HTTP requests, and I expect to be able to maybe serve up content, but that's it. And at runtime, you could put in an HTTP server that was written in Go, that was written in Rust, it was served out, I don't know, who knows where. All of that is eliminated from the concerns that I have to worry about as a developer, which is extremely powerful. It makes me happy, but I think it makes tailors of the world happy too.
Oh, it definitely makes tailors of the world happy. Let's just say that. It really, just think about how big of a deal that is. Imagine a log4j incident happens in. I use log4j not because it was a bug that most people know about. I have written plenty of bugs, and many of them have been security bugs, so there's no judgment here. But that was just a big one that affected everybody. And so what happened, and once again, we talked to a million people about this. People had to go back to their containers, and they had to say, okay, we have all these dependencies in here. One of them is log4j. So they had to go rebuild their Java stuff, update the dependency. Then they had to rebuild all their containers and then redeploy all their apps, like 10,000 of them at some of these big companies. And they had to redeploy all of them. And this dependency had nothing to do with their day-to-day business and their day-to-day money making that they needed to get done with this stuff they were writing. And instead, like, they had to spend all this time and effort to update that. And when we pull out these non-functional requirements, you just can hot swap it. This is something where my coworker Brooks and I actually gave a talk at KubeCon EU where we did this live on stage. Like, we introduced a big bug into one of these providers and showed that we could just rotate it out without the developer ever having to change their code. And it can just pretty much be hot swapped at runtime. And that's just such a cool characteristic to have, because now you just update the dependencies. And once again, this is bringing that pendulum back to the middle. The developers can do the code that they need to do. The DevOps or SRE side can handle all the compliance and platform work and all the things that they need to do without having to know every single thing that the other person's doing. We use this to our advantage because Cosmonic is actually like built. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but it's built on top of Wasm Cloud. Like, we've written most of the actual product that you use is written using WebAssembly. And one of the things we did at the beginning was we started with a key value store just to store a lot of our data for the application. And as we went along, we're like, okay, there's some stuff in here that's secret, or we might be adding more secret stuff in here. So we need to put it somewhere. In normal application development, if I was doing this with like a normal microservice, a container, I'd have to go, okay, well, we're going to use Vault because pretty much everybody uses Vault for this. It's a great tool. So now I have to get the Vault client, and I have to configure the Vault client, and I have to do all these things. And I would have literally had to rewrite my code to take advantage of that. Instead, we wrote a provider that satisfied one of these contracts out of the key value contract. We slotted it in. We had to make 1 or 2 line changes because we were trying to segment our data in a few of them. But for the most part, we didn't even have to change our code. We just swapped it out. And that is a completely paradigm changing way of how you can do it, because you're not restricted to anything we offer you either. And so that's, I think, like, we harp on this all the time, and we repeat some of these stories ad nauseum as we talk about it, but it's real. Like, this isn't just made up. You don't have to like obey a ton of special rules here. You just have to code against these capabilities and then get what you want at runtime based on whatever the platform wants to give you, rather than making this something to do at the first decision of writing your code.
So basically, imagine fixing that dependency, maybe the one that had log4j, shell vulnerability, maybe you had struts somewhere, but that gets fixed in one place, compiled, released, and then at runtime fixed everywhere else. That's pretty powerful. We can almost start saying that we're an eco-friendly company because we're providing this type of capability. But there's actually one other big reason why Wasm Cloud approaches this problem in this way, and that's because Wasm itself is constrained by allowing certain things in and out of the sandbox. And the MVP of Wasm and the current set of open standards is pretty restrictive of what is allowed today. And there is the way to extend it is basically saying, hey, you can export this function, and when you get a handle to this function, you can call it, and it lets you do, say, pass a request around. Then it's on the host side to fulfill that whatever that need is. And so in the case of HTTP, for example, the Wasm module itself, the code in it, isn't the thing that's making the HTTP request. It's not talking to the network or any way, shape, or form. It is really the host runtime that is running that Wasm module that does that work. And with Wasm Cloud, with these contracts, it lets it so that even though Wasm isn't fully featured, it's not like a general purpose programming language that you can just do everything you expect, open sockets and networking and threads, all that type of stuff. Although there are standards for all of those underway. Way before even those standards become available, Wasm Cloud makes it accessible because you just need that contract. And then on the Wasm Cloud side, we're able to fulfill that with many different capability providers.
Yeah, and that's really important to call out to people here, is that like Wasm is still kind of new. I mean, it's been going for a while, but what we're using it for on the server side is still very new, and it has rough edges. And I mentioned it before, we built Cosmonic on top of Wasm Cloud. So you can build real things with WebAssembly right now using Wasm Cloud. And that was the whole goal. And we still follow all these standards. So all these cool standards that Bailey just mentioned of being able to do all the kind of the basic behaviors are going to be folded straight into Wasm Cloud. But right now, you're still able to do something real with it. And the other thing too is this kind of sounds like magic. And honestly, the first time you see it working, it does kind of look like magic. But underneath the hood, all this is fairly well protected. Like WASM itself is sandboxed. And WASM Cloud follows the whole idea of defense in depth. This is another problem that's really hard across the distributed system, is how do you secure those things? And people turn to MTLS and a couple other different types of communication things that go along here. But what we do is everything that's on this network that we connect together is signed. Every invocation between every single component of the system is signed. The things that join in are signed. Each of these pieces of code is signed, and everything has to be valid for it to actually work. And most of this is actually fairly transparent to the user. So we've managed to give a massive defense in depth here too that complements what WASM already gives us with its sandbox model. And so all these things are just kind of the extra features that WASM Cloud brings on top. But the reason we talk about it is because once people hear about WASM, they want to know what they can do with it. And WASM Cloud is something you can do right now. And if you wanted to like literally do a one-click, I start doing something with it, that's what Cosmonic is for, because we have hosted WASM Cloud for you. So those are kind of this is the reason we really wanted to talk about it and get to it, because we've thought a long time about how we want to do this in a distributed way. And we think we've created something that is really worth people's time and takes away a lot of those rough edges without crippling you or forcing you to work within a specific box all the time.
Or language, even. That is something else that I forgot to mention in WebAssembly 101. Just about any language can compile to WASM. There is a set, like things that are statically typed. So something like Rust and C++, those compile really well to WASM and are super well supported. There's other tools like TinyGo that works for Go. So there are many, and many of them are up and coming, but that is something else that happens with platforms and platform teams across companies, is that they bless a certain language, they bless a certain dependency. And what we're hoping to do is open the door to let you do a lot of these different things, but in a way that satisfies all of your security constraints. And honestly, right now, WASM is feeling a lot like it did in 2013 and 2015. I mean, it's really exciting. I felt like walking around KubeCon, everybody was hyping it. And really, I would say that there's really no better time to jump on and start playing around. I really recommend going in our Slack. We've got different WASM Club labs, so you can try things out. I would love to see you in our community.
Yeah, we'd love to see you there. And honestly, hopefully this discussion has been useful to you. Feel free to hit us up on those Slack things, ask us any questions, and we'll be there to answer them and help out with whatever you want to know about WebAssembly. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone, today, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the conference as well.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everybody. Mike Rothman here with another Techstrong TV interview. I am pleased to be joined by Leonid Belkin. He is CTO. Is that right, Leonid? CTO?
Yes, sir.
Founder of Torque. Torque's a pretty exciting company in the security automation space. So we're going to talk about all sorts of things around security automation. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've, kind of been calling for folks to figure out a way to leverage their people better. And it would seem the machines are a good option for that. So we'll dig into all that. We'll dig into a new offering that Torque has introduced to give you some perspective on what you should and shouldn't be automating. But I shouldn't steal Leonid's thunder. Leonid, welcome to Techstrong TV. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me, Mike.
Yeah, you bet. So why don't you just explain a little bit about your background, kind of where you're at? I mean, the pretty bad scene in the back of your office.
Absolutely. I'm definitely not going to take the credit for the office design. That's been done by someone else. My role in the company is indeed a chief technology officer. Prior to co-founding this company, I was actually a co-founder and, again, a CTO of another security innovator. Luminate Security, we were among the front runners in zero trust network access approach, driven this company from inception all the way to its adoption by Fortune 500 companies and acquisition, eventually by Symantec Corporation. Prior to that, spent many, many years with world-leading enterprise security vendors, for example, Checkpoint Software Technologies, etc. So that's me. Torque, as you mentioned, Torque is a security automation company, and we are trying to finally bring security automation as a mainstay to organizations by first enabling everyone, not just your security developers team, not just professional services people you bring in to develop some automation for you, but literally every security subject matter expert that is familiar with the process. Process consists of step A, step B, step C. Once you know that, with our platform, you'll be able to express it in an automated workflow, make security issues resolve faster, collaborate with your colleagues alongside, and actually turn your day from being defensive into being proactive, right? Creating something, working proactively to improve the security posture rather than chasing your tail and trying to clean your table from the incoming events.
Gosh, that sounds great for a lot of people that have been chasing their tail for the better part of the last couple of decades. That certainly is.
We definitely feel the pain. We come from this background ourselves. It is very real.
100%. So again, automation is definitely something that I've taken an interest in. What are some of the, kind of use cases or, kind of activities that folks get started with, using Torque?
I think traditionally, when you tell somebody in the enterprise security organization about automation, they somehow start thinking about phishing emails analytics, right? One of your employees flags one of the incoming emails as a potential phishing attempt, and then you analyze the attachment, you analyze the links, you analyze the content, you do some other searches, you respond to them, et cetera, et cetera. Somehow, historically, this has become the first blockbuster, I should say, for automating. For us, quite frankly, the reality is that there are so many, maybe even lower-hanging fruits with much quicker ROI. Consider automating things such as user suspicious behavior. Have you, Mike, recently reset your password or acquired a new mobile device for your second-factor authentication? How about just, reducing your regular access to a lot of sensitive resources and providing you really convenient tools for just-in-time access? Or how about, for example, helping you with processing results of a vulnerability scan for your cloud environment, for your on-premises environment, right? You have received a bunch of vulnerabilities. For each and every one of them, you need to understand who's the owner of the asset, what is the exposure, maybe introduce external attack surface scan, maybe follow up with the asset owner, et cetera, et cetera. If you're a large organization, you would have tens, hundreds of these processes. Okay. So lots of security processes that are not just incident response can be very, very valuable in automation, but also traditional incident response across all of its stages, big time.
Yep. So how do you get started? So all right, you got to pick a use case, and then are there templates that you guys bring to the table? Is it a professional services driven thing where somebody's got to get you, on board and then hold your hand through the process of building a couple of them? Because a big impediment has always been I would automate things if I only had the time, right? But you're spending too much time doing the crap that you should be automating. So it becomes one of these, chicken and egg type things. So how do you onboard and how do you get value quickly?
So first of all, I think you hit the problem right on the head. Indeed, the challenge with security automation so far has been the ramp up time and the sort of like challenging return on investment, right? Wait a second, do I have time? So we start indeed by, first and foremost, writing a library of blueprints. Now, these blueprints, they are taxonomized according to the pillars in your cybersecurity program. Email security, identity security, data loss prevention, application security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The platform itself, and that's one of our biggest, let's say, one of the biggest things we keep on investing in, is such that any security practitioner on a level from junior analyst all the way to seasoned analyst, architect, and engineer can actually leverage the platform to express whatever they need automated themselves, right? We are in many ways, shapes, or forms anti-professional services company. Now, definitely we're not against having someone join and build things for you if you really do not have the capacity, but it's not because the tool is complex, right? We suddenly turn it from something that you absolutely cannot use yourself and need professional services into something that you definitely can use. And if you'd like, we have a lot of partners that can come on board and complement your team, giving you a much faster velocity. Having said that, just to get us to some sort of a numeric comparative, we've seen not huge teams of 3, 4, 5 experienced security engineers build up to 50 automated processes in the first month of product adoption, right? That is a lot. And what we keep seeing, and we are very adamant on investigating the product usage, is that this pace actually doesn't go down as the product use goes longer, but actually goes up. One of our proudest moments is getting the feedback that the value of the product grows with the time it stays in your organization. That is a long-lasting impact.
That would be great, right? Because we all know that we need to automate more rather than less. And if you can make it easy and accessible to a lot of the, folks internal to the organization, that certainly helps. From that standpoint. Well, I want to hit into another impediment that I know, but I want to make sure that we talk about insights, right? Because, so you've automated 50 things, you've automated 70 things, right? How do you know whether you're automating the right stuff? How do you know if it's actually triggering, where things are getting held up? I take it that that's what, kind of your new insights product is really focused around.
First of all, absolutely yes, and even more. Many of our users have a challenge, by the way, a very relevant one, on how do they quantify their investment in building automation, make it tangible to their managers. Okay, next quarter, what would you like me to be doing? And what would be the outcomes that I deliver with the investment? And this is exactly where Insights comes in with a very, very important fundamental idea. It has to be, for it to work, very easy for you to derive that information without bringing overhead on the people that are actually going and automating things, right? If you have to increase the work they need to be doing by, 10% in order to be able to derive the insights, my hunch is that most of the people won't do it and you will remain in the dark. So first, very important property of this insight is that every time you create an automated process, in the background, fully automated, we create a, let's call it, metadata representation of a process. We'll look at what kind of steps you are taking, and we are categorizing. Is it like a threat intelligence enrichment, or is it an application security finding follow-up, or maybe it's a service improvement chatbot? That's also an option. Naturally, we suggest these categories to the person as the workflow is being delivered. The person can, of course, override it and say, yeah, I know it looks like X, but actually it's Y, which is perfectly fine. Second point is, the person that is building an automated process is probably the same person that used to run this process manually day after day after day. So they would be the utmost experts to say, how much time does this automation save them? Is it like 1 minute? Perfectly fine. If you're running 10,000 times a day, that's a lot of minutes right there, right? Or is it more? And the sort of like the small delta of writing that information along the way doesn't cost much. What it allows us to do is later on to look at the telemetry, right, of what the system is operating, etc., but on a metadata level. And we will be able to tell you that your investment, for example, in data loss prevention automation has saved you this many working days, this many working hours, etc. And by the way, has come on the heel of investing this many minutes in building these workflows. Naturally, again, a parameter we already have in the system. Right? And we will be able to show this data historically. So I would be able to tell you that, hey, in the first quarter of this year, you invested in automating endpoint threat detection events. And afterwards, we handle this many events, saving you that many hours versus the investment of this many hours to build it and then maybe to troubleshoot it, etc. Having this come fully automated, right? It's not an analysis that you need to make. It's not a BI tool that requires you a lot of manipulations of the data. It's pretty much as autopilot as it can be. That, I think, is the key here that crosses the threshold between, just the dashboards every process, every product has a dashboard, into something that people actually derive this aha moment from, right? That's why we call it insights and not dashboard, telemetry, or any other of the superlatives we could have used here.
That's right. So folks get these insights, guess what? It's packaged up as a report that then they can go talk to, the operational folks that they're helping out. Is it, used to, make a case for more automation internally, all of the above?
So I think the three main uses is present the return on investment. Could be to your colleagues, could be to your managers, sponsors of the project, etc. B, it also can show you where your next investments should go, thanks to the fact that, again, there is a very clear taxonomy based on NIST frameworks, for example, on what pillars does your cybersecurity program have. And by showing you in which of them you have already introduced automation, also show you which others are still left subject to manual processes. So that can definitely be driven for that. And of course, I think that's the real-time part of it. Sure, I mean, the report could be exported as any document, but the beauty of it is that it is constantly live, right? And you could see not only a single position in time, like what are we doing today since the morning, but actually how they've been doing this month as opposed to last month, right? What are we doing this quarter as opposed to previous quarter? At the end of the day, if organization in any area, right, security or reliability, adopts automation, it is always a journey, right? It's not a switch you flip and you move from manual to automated. And this journey needs to have some sort of monitoring. How fast are you going? Are you in the right direction? That, I think, is the biggest value that insights can introduce.
Interesting. Well, that's cool. That's cool. So good adoption so far. I mean, you just introduced it, but, kind of a lot of the existing customers interested so far?
Actually, thanks to the fact that the overhead to start using it is so small, we see a very strong pace of adoption among existing customers. Furthermore, surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprisingly enough, it also serves as an accelerator to adopt. Maybe again, thanks to the fact that it makes investments in automation more tangible, you would feel more confidence to adopt, to share it with more teams once you know that you have this sort of like shining light and you definitely oversee what goes on, right? You're less afraid of this thing going wild and you not getting the right returns.
Yeah. And speaking of that, right? So one of the last topics I want to hit on is kind of my own personal experience with automation. And that's really just who is empowered to make a number of these changes, right? I mean, historically, security, when it was a command and control environment, they were in charge of the firewalls, they could block stuff, right? They were in charge of quarantining this, they could get in the way of that. Now with cloud and with DevOps and a lot of these distributed teams, it's not as obvious, right? The ops folks, the security folks certainly have a say. They can, provide an opinion. They can certainly, point out where things are problematic, but can they make changes, right? Can they start to impact, operating production systems, which is obviously a critical requirement in order to, really accept and adopt any kind of automation technology.
So this is actually both a challenge and an opportunity. And this duality of security teams being now more responsible for detection, but not necessarily having the same ability as they used to. Hey, let's just close the firewall ports. These days are long gone. This is actually what the DevSecOps philosophy is talking about. How do we involve additional role players in the organization? Let's say infrastructure, DevOps, site reliability people, in your example, could go all the way deeper into application engineers, right? The people who own the business logic. How do we involve them in security processes with a very important end game? At the end of the day, security processes, for them to scale, for them to maintain strong security posture, they have to be streamlined. The paradigm where you would be a security guy, he would be an expert, and then you would open a ticket for me to fix it.
Right.
This is a non-working paradigm. Your mission to keep this organization secure is unachievable by you because you have no tools to actually deliver it end to end. This is a pitfall. But then again, you brought up the challenge. would I really trust you to provide full access to start now introducing changes in my production environment? Not really, because then I would be harming my mission, which is keep the business, the digital infrastructure flowing. So what would we do? You see, the technological world has already solved this problem by providing interfaces. If I provide you an interface, and we agree, by the way, you as a security owner and me in the infra, on what would be the operations that you would be doing, I will be actually implementing them, providing you the automations, building blocks that you can now trigger in order to perform the relevant containments, remediation, et cetera, et cetera. This is actually where an organization would make a huge leap in the efficiency of its security, because now we are working together. I'm not bugging you because you actually have the relevant interfaces from me to deliver on your goals, and you are not harming me because these interfaces, they work within my toolage, within my permission set, etc. Best and most efficient automation implementations in a hybrid environment actually function like this. And this is what DevSecOps, right? Connecting these two in a continuous cycle. This is what it actually means.
Okay, good. That's I look forward to that day, right? And a lot of it gets back to making the ops people feel like it's their idea, right? That step at a time. Kind of it's this is a thing that I want to do, right? It happens to be a security use case, security problem, this type of technology, but it's not just like the security hand is coming in and making changes to your kind of operational environment. So
siloed approach will always fail, right? Whole notion of modern clouds, digital services is that they're so streamlined. Siloed approaches kills all their benefits.
No, that's great. That's great. But listen, I think this is great stuff, right? I mean, I think we need it from the standpoint of really improving the efficiency of how we do things. I mean, scale, complexity, all this stuff has to be addressed via automation. So exciting stuff coming from Torque. How do folks get in touch with you, Leonid, if they want to, learn more about the product or insights or just, kind of have a chat?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, you can always approach Torque.io website and use Contact Us. Me personally,
TORQ, right? TORQ.
Correct. TORQ.io. And you can find me directly at Leonid at Torque.io.
That's great. Well, listen, Leonid, really appreciate you being on Techstrong TV today. Good stuff. Again, huge fan of automation. So hopefully we'll, continue to make progress on this front because as an industry, we all need it.
Would love to share where we're getting with it later. Have a great day.
Look forward to the next discussion we'll have, my friend. All right. And with that, thank you. And we will send it back to the studio for our next segment.
Thank you.
This is Techstrong TV.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by Claire Drummond. Claire is head of product marketing for Jira and Agile Solutions at Atlassian. Welcome, Claire.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. Before we jump into our topic, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Atlassian.
Sure. So I have been at Atlassian for about 7.5 years, and I have the pleasure of running the product marketing team for the Jira suite of products, which include Jira Software, Jira Work Management, and Jira Product Discovery, which is in beta. And we have a few other Jira products that aren't under my direct supervision, but that's kind of what the Jira product marketing team is looking after and the brand in general. And it's been a wild, awesome ride. And I love to see Atlassian in hyper growth mode, and all of the customers that we've been able to serve over these last 7.5 years. Has just been an incredible journey.
I've used Jira and Confluence and your development tools implemented at multiple companies. It's amazing how Jira's transformed. It was a ticketing system when I started. And today it's sort of the nucleus of so much of what's going on at Atlassian. That's fantastic.
I love that you say that. That will make it into our and our messaging, the nucleus.
Oh, good. Yeah, you can put me on your annual report. No, I'm
Perfect.
So it's awesome. No, I enjoy your products very much. Well, we're talking about an event that's coming up here in February. Love to have you. Why don't you tell us about it, what it is, what's going to be happening there? We'll go into it a little bit here.
Great. Yeah. So as you kind of mentioned, Atlassian makes project management, collaboration, and team tools for teams. And we have about 100,000 customers in EMEA alone and 250,000 customers worldwide. So we decided that we, in our 3 major markets, which include Agile and DevOps, IT solutions, and work management, we have a Agile and DevOps focused event in the EMEA region. And we chose Berlin because we have a very vibrant community for what we call ACE, which is stands for Atlassian Community Events. And that community gets together on Friday nights. We provide them pizza and beer, and they talk about Jira, among other things. And we wanted to make sure that we were going to where our customers were already getting together and hanging out. And so we're basically taking that vibe and that incredible culture that has grown over the last 20 years, and we're bringing it to them. So that is really the ethos of this event in Berlin. We're putting customers at the center of it. And there's a few examples that I can give for the content of the event that really showcases why we're doing it like that and why in Berlin, even though it will be cold. I'm coming from California, so I'm going to bring my big puffy jacket, maybe 2. But I think the event itself is going to be extremely fun and vibrant and will warm right up. So so I can tell you a little bit more about the content of the event if you want.
You had me at pizza and beer. Those are the 2 food groups, at least 2 of the food groups for developers. But yes, tell us some more about the event.
Well, it is in Germany, so maybe it'll be pretzels. I'm not sure what the final menu will be, but yeah. So we've done a few different outreaches for customers to submit content, and one of the tracks is called For Teams by Teams, and we hosted this on the Atlassian community, and asked the community members themselves to submit their talks, but then also vote on the talks that they wanted to see, and so. Those top 3 submissions were actually flying out to Berlin, and they will be presenting talks that the community has found extremely relevant and things that they really wanted to hear about. So that's one of the tracks, and that is really similar to what happens at these ACE events. There's another amazing track that I want to tell you about, which is called the Devs Unleashed Hackathon. This is our first ever hackathon. And what we did is we partnered with DevPost, and we ran a hackathon for the last 6 weeks. And developers have built games on top of our products, and they submitted these games. And then the community, again, voted on the top 3 submissions. We're flying those folks out, and they will be presenting their games in front of a celebrity panel of judges a la Shark Tank. Mm-hmm. Speaking of Shark Tank, we actually have Robert Herjavec, who is one of the sharks from Shark Tank, as one of the judges, and he will also be hosting. And we have a couple other celebs, Jeremiah Peoples, who is a developer evangelist, and he's hilarious. And so he's going to be joining us as well, including we're also going to have one of our customers, Nora from Spotify. And then we have Cameron Deach, who is our CRO, and our head of engineering, Robert Crone. So we're really excited for the celebrity panel and to fly all the developers that had spent time over the holiday break to build these really, really cool games. I'm very excited for people to see.
It's pretty amazing lineups. Maybe one of those game developed that they've created will end up on the real Shark Tank, and they'll get some funding. Who knows where it's going to go?
I don't know. I'm really excited to play it. It's like, little Pac-Man eating epics. That's kind of the vibe. So it's pretty specific, I guess, for the audience, but we're excited about it. Okay. So
a lot of
fun. Those are some of the content tracks that we have. And then we also have our keynote, which I will be part of. And that's where we're going to be announcing some really cool advancements to the Jira suite of products and some other announcements for Atlassian as a whole. And some of those include a new product and also some really easy ways for people to get started with Jira, and a new, very cool pricing offer that I think a lot of companies are going to be very excited about. So just to tease a few things that we'll be announcing in our keynote.
Sounds good. Can't announce too much. Got to save a little bit for the conference, but I'm sure there'll be some exciting things. Now, this is happening on February 9th, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. It's February 9th in Berlin in person, and will also be live streamed digitally on our Atlassian website. And you can also sign up for the digital event, which has some special features like a live Q&A, for example, that you can only access if you register. Yeah.
Fantastic. So tell me a little about, so this is a first of this kind, right? Because you're building off of the community events that have been happening in that area and kind of turning that into a broader conference. Is that right?
We've done a few regional events. We've done some things called like Team Tour, for example, where we've gone to various regions and did specific talks. But this is the first, customer and user conference that we've done for our market for Agile and DevOps. So it's very specific to that customer base and audience and what they really want to hear about. Whereas we also have our broader team conference, which is in April, which is everything Atlassian and kind of runs the gamut. So we have had two other regional market events, which one was in London in December, and that was covering our ITSM market, IT service management market. And then we also had a work management event in San Francisco towards the fall of last year. So this is our first Agile DevOps focused event. And we're bringing out product managers and engineering leaders and product marketing leaders from all over Atlassian to really get that face time with customers and talk about their specific needs.
What's cool about this, I'm sure the Teams event is being a much kind of broader in scope, is a fantastic event. Developers love, and I use developer community, right? It's the Scrum masters, it's the product people, it's the folks doing development tests, everything else, DevOps engineers. They really enjoy something that's kind of tailored to what the work they do, the tools, the products, the processes, the learnings, rub elbows. If you want to talk to the product manager about an idea, that person's there, right? I remember I did that at one of the Atlassian conferences. Like, oh, really? You're the product manager? Oh, great. I have some ideas I want to talk to you about. And that's the kind of vibe that you get at a developer-focused conference. There's this very kind of person-to-person, a lot of networking and conversational opportunities you might not have sitting on the other side of a Zoom from the other side of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really organic. And Atlassian has this very cool vibe that we, in the remote world, it's really hard to carry that over. So we're really trying to look for opportunities to do that. I remember, back in the day, our user conference was called Summit, and customers would come up to us and just be like, I just like hanging out with you guys. Are super fun. I'm like, yeah, I know, we're pretty fun. We like to get down. So I think that's really the plan for this conference. And we also have a program part of it that is coffee chats. I'm not going to butcher the name in German, but you can sign up for one-on-one time directly with product leaders and myself. You can chat with me if you want. And that, I think, is going to be a really great way for people to connect one-on-one and make sure that they actually get that face time.
Mm-hmm. So, fantastic. Yeah. Is this a one-day event then? It sounds like it's maybe, or is it multiple day?
So we have the one-day event, which is on February 9th. We're also doing a concurrent event called App Week, where we actually bring developers from our partnerships, our marketplace partnerships, together to actually build and work on their apps alongside Atlassian engineers. So that is happening at the same time. And then we all get together on the 9th.
Okay, that's where it converges on the 9th.
Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Anything else you want to tell us about it? Obviously, the website's important too. I think is it ace.atlassian.com is where your events are.
It is sort of. It's sort of? Okay. events.atlassian.com/unleash.
Unleash. Okay. I got that wrong. Events.atlassian.com/unleash. All right.
Yep.
Cool. Very cool. Well, Claire, it's been a great pleasure. Definitely come back. We'd love to hear how it went. Come back after the event and share with us you're always welcome to join us on Techstrong TV and talk Atlassian and development and DevOps and Agile and all the cool things that you guys do.
Yeah, I would love to. That'd be great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was fun to chat about it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too. Claire Drummond, who is head of product marketing for Jira and Agile Solutions with Atlassian. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
Hey, everybody. Mike Rothman here, GM of Techstrong Research, Chief Strategy Officer of Techstrong Group. It is another episode of the Techstrong Research Review. We missed last week. We had our Techstrong All Hands meeting, so Mitch and I were knee-deep in Chef Baba and boat trips and actually some meetings, and we have some cool stuff planned.
We got some productive work done. Mitch Ashley, principal with Techstrong Research and CTO with Techstrong Group. Yeah, it was just, you get a lot of stuff done when you're in person, don't you?
We do. And it was nice to see, and I've been with the company since July, right? So there were a whole bunch of people I actually hadn't met in person. So it was great, kind of just not just on the Zoom box, but actually being in the same space as folks. And it was nice. It was a good event, but we didn't record the review last week. So we're back. And I think this week we want to hit on something that everybody seems to be talking about because, if you got to jump on the bandwagon, you may as well jump with both feet. So let's talk about Chat GPT, Mitch. It is everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. My kids are having, it write their papers. They're actually not having it write their papers at this point. I think it's only because they haven't figured out that Chat GPT can write their papers in school.
They'll figure it out. And I'm sure they knew before we did.
Yeah. Well, if it's on TikTok, then they must have known.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the only way my kids know about anything on that front. But let's talk a little bit about, again, generative AI in general and really the impact it's going to have on, operations and analytics and really, part of the challenge of whether you're trying to optimize your DevOps environment or, try to find and isolate different malicious activities is making the connection between all these different, data types and understanding that. So where does generative AI start to play into, aggregating and analyzing telemetry? It's not about anomaly detection, right? It's about, kind of trying to find the relationships between these, disparate, data sources and data streams. So what are you thinking, Mitch, at this point?
Well, yeah, I did a segment on one of our shows, AI Times, and we talked a lot about this. And a lot of the generative AI right now is about create this for me, create an image that has this, do a painting, write this for me. And by the way, I did a LinkedIn poll where I typed in a question. And it actually wasn't Chat GPT; it was another one because it was busy, right? And I just pasted the text other than took the footnotes out of it, but where it got the text from, and then said, is this the answer to this question? Is it generative AI or not? And 57% said it was, 36% said it wasn't, that it was a person that wrote it, and 7% said they're not sure. So this will air after a poll's closed, and so it actually was written.
Was it?
AI.
See, what's funny is that I got that wrong because it was recent data, and I figured to use Chat GPT, and I know that hadn't been based upon anything recent. So that's kind of why I had inferred that it wasn't. But it didn't occur to me that you would hack the system and actually use a different generative AI algorithm.
Well, I didn't have a choice. So other than if I wrote it myself. And what's interesting is Grammarly, Chat GPT and these things are supposed to be perfect grammar, and that's how you're supposed to be able to tell, right? Grammarly said that it had an extra comma it didn't need. So I don't know. I don't know what I would have guessed. It looked pretty, it definitely was edited. I wouldn't have written something that clearly just on my own without some help, but for sure. So if you said, if you said it wasn't, I would have had to have some help. But the point being is generative AI right now is kind of pointed at this, create this for me kind of, like one of the applications was in a recording, like for a deaf person or in a live setting, pick out the voices, what the different people who are saying, because I can't lip read 6 people at once, right? And help me follow the conversation. So it's interesting. It's not AI. It's just a particular field of AI.
Right.
And it kind of reminds me of, like AI has arrived, like robotics arrived when factories started putting robotics in, or blockchain become the savior for security, but not really. It is kind of one of those moments. It seems like, well, and I think it is going to have the staying power and it's going to change things, but it's not going to wipe out every white collar job. It's not going to, may make educators' job more difficult. Can't use calculators on the test, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I really do have, mixed feelings about this because, clearly, especially in a lot of the areas that we cover, we have skills problems, right? We have, we don't have enough resources. And yes, it's helping a little bit that, kind of a whole bunch of big companies that, kind of hoovered up a lot of the really talented folks are, kind of right sizing their employee base, which is putting, a decent amount of talent, back out there. That's helpful. But again, it's kind of like a drop in a bucket, right? I mean, there just aren't enough people with these skills in order to do that. So if there are tools that can help us be more productive or spend less time on things that don't really make a difference, like documenting stuff. You already, if there are templates or forms or something that you can put in and, you press a button and reasonable text comes out that then you can just spend time editing, that really cuts down on the time to deliver stuff.
I got the use case for you. Write my compliance report for me.
Yeah.
Every security professional would be.
That's right. That's right. So if you have a template and then you can, kind of set one of these algorithms on sitting there saying, yep, based upon this, just pop it into a format that makes sense. I mean, that helps. Right. And especially since you've got information all over the place, if you start to say, kind of what is that? And they can, really intelligently look at it relative to the requirements and the mandates, again, I think that's a great use case, right? Is it going to help you really find, an attacker? Not yet, right? Is it really going to help you really optimize your environment? Not yet, right? And so, again, and part of what we're going to be talking about at TechStrongCon, right, is AI in each one of these different, kind of areas. And that's certainly the area of focus that I'm going to bring to, the stuff that we're talking about. So,
well, and it's more of a Turing test, right? Can you tell if it's a computer on the other side? It doesn't mean that it understands what it's writing, right? It's correlating like information and assembling it together. And there's obviously intelligence in doing that, artificial. By the way, all my intelligence is artificial, but that's a whole other topic. But it doesn't know what it all means. It couldn't write, yes, it could write some, poem or whatever, but does it really know what it means? At least now it does. It's not truly intelligent, to your point. Is it going to go find the hacker?
That's right. That's right. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe this is a short episode.
Who knows? It could be 6 months from now. It could be something else. It could, I think it's got staying power. But I don't think it, let's go find new jobs because our jobs are going away.
That's right.
That rarely happens.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit, right? So, you mentioned Grammarly. And, that's really the grammar checking, kind of thing. Obviously, we do a ton of writing, so it's an indispensable tool, if only just to point out that I forgot, that I'm using a passive voice or that I forgot to put a comma, in a certain place. Has that impacted our editing group? Not really. Right.
Maybe a few brain cells from seeing stupid stuff,
right.
Stupid
it's just obvious thing. So, but I think we're kind of at this weird inflection point where we're really trying to figure out what the best use cases are for the technology. And the thing that made, kind of Chat GPT feel like a bit of an earthquake is just because it was able to put together stuff that we didn't know, could happen. I mean, I think people knew that, you could assemble, kind of data and have it, generate stuff. I think DALL-E, kind of the other, image generation thing, kind of said, oh, holy crap, that's amazing, from that standpoint. So we're starting to see, what generative AI can do because we just hadn't been exposed to it before, right? So that's what feels, so novel. But I still think it's a technology looking for a solution at this point, right.
That's how I felt about Bitcoin, kind of still do, or about blockchain. You know what? My guess is that we might see things like, instead of a chat GPT, we'll see a chat GPT for medical and a chat GPT for finance, and one for security and one for tech. In other words, the sort of general purpose AI kind of things, those are really super hard to do. And a lot of what we see in generative with these, DALL-E and there's other image art and things, those are all sort of like a narrow slice of where we're applying generative AI to it. So I think the curation of that information and getting even more refinement of getting the right stuff presented to you in a document, like write this medical report and here's the data and here's the other 50 we've created like it, and
do it.
Go write the 51st. That seems to me a potential really good use of this. And then doctors aren't sitting, well, they probably don't write the report anyway, but aren't sitting around writing reports. And a lot of that's done for us, like checking grammar with Grammarly today. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, no, who knows? I think that's that's a great thing. So let's talk a little bit about stuff that is non-generative, right? So we did research earlier this year last year about kind of AI and ops, right? We've done AI, kind of in application testing. So we've kind of danced around, kind of what the impact is before. Have we seen any of this stuff really start to manifest? I mean, we talked last year about how, it was going to help us refine what to, focus on from a code coverage standpoint if we looked at application, kind of testing on that front. Again, talked about observability and how, kind of AI is going to help from that standpoint. So you give me a sense of what you're seeing in terms of, kind of the real impact of that on operations today.
So we did do some research, of some sponsored research around observability, and one element of it was looking at AI ops, right? How much you're applying to AI in an operation setting. And it was, I think, I don't remember the numbers right off the top of my head, but it was, like in the 15 to 16% range, people were either experimenting with it, working with it, seeing some results for it. But it was things like correlation of alerts and reducing alert storms and sort of the manual, reducing the noise kinds of AI things, which, when machine learning took off, I went to one of the experts in a lab that I was working with and said, so why is machine learning suddenly taking off? And his answer was because we have huge mounds of data that it can go search and then find patterns in, and that's what machine learning, one flavor of it anyway, unsupervised uses. So guess what observability does is generate tons of data, right, from all telemetry from all these devices and IoT and network and software and everything else. So I think we'll see it as something that is an enhancement. I mean, right now every technology vendor says, and we use AI to fill in the blank. Well, what does it mean? Probably machine learning in most cases, if it's a lot of data. Writing code for you is one of the things, of course, that GitHub and Google also are doing some things with. My question about that is, writing code is easy. Maintaining code is hard. Who's going to maintain what they wrote? And I say this from experience because long ago, I was working with code generator products, and the code it generates not what people would write. It wasn't anything close. Now, maybe it's a lot better today, but it was, it's not pretty. Let's put it that way. So I think it's going to be an element of a lot of things, and each vendor technology company will figure out where they can really leverage it, and they have teams working on it, and enterprises will have models and some things that they can use AI and machine learning against. Will it be the next, I don't know, DoorDash or whatever kind of changed the model of the industry? Maybe, but nobody's good at predicting those things.
Yeah. And we don't really know when. I mean, I think it's one of these things that we want to, kind of be excited about the potential, but tap the brakes a little bit in terms of, kind of its short-term, impact. And I do think the point about, kind of every company says they're doing AI, ML in some way, shape, or form. And I think they are, right? I mean, I think it helps, again, I look at things typically through a security prism, and it helps when you're looking at, kind of all this different telemetry, having, some algorithms look and try to refine and find, unexpected activity or different patterns that you haven't seen before. That assists in terms of, kind of your detection capabilities. So that's goodness, right? So we're inching along, right? And then every so often we'll get this, discontinuity, at least in perception. And I think that's kind of where we are now. And that's why everybody's going bonkers over, ChatGPT. And again, I think, just to be clear, it's really cool. It is really cool. But is it going to help you do your job better, in the very near term? Probably not.
I wouldn't change my major right yet. If I was in college, maybe I would work on it, but not thinking this one's going to go away.
If you've got any kind of math capabilities and understand that, definitely continue to do that. That is going to be, but data science has been really hot for a long time. So that's not, I keep pushing my stepson in that direction because he's kind of a mathy guy. And, I'm inching him along. We'll see. But it's, again, it's really where the future is. There's no question about that. It's just how quickly we're going to get there.
It's hard to answer for your kids. How am I going to use anything from algebra on, right?
That's right.
But now you can't.
So if you're trying to draw some common ground with your kids and get them excited about this stuff, just tell them that's what TikTok uses to figure out what, keeps you on that friggin' app for hours at a time, right? It's an algorithm based upon what you've seen in the past and what you've, tend to favor and where you go from there, from a navigation standpoint. So then they're like, oh, okay. So. All right. We have anything else? Anything else, Mitch, on your, in your craw that you need to get off your chest?
I'm looking forward to RSAC. Kind of thinking about what that's like, and we'll be there together this year because you are walking around and looking good from your knee surgery or whatever we call that.
Making progress for sure.
You are doing great. So it'll be great to do that with you, and we'll be doing a bunch of interviews, and we're starting that process, that planning as well. But with all the travel, and we still have kind of weird COVID or no COVID, or is this happening and that happening? I'm trying to figure out, have we emerged out of the people don't go to things, or they only go to the events they know, or are we still sort of stuck in this? I just go to RSAC because that's the one to go to, and I don't go to the thing in downtown Denver or downtown Atlanta.
Right. And I don't know that it's COVID related. I think it's as much remote work related, and that
probably
kind of when folks had to go out and they were going to the office every day. If they're going to go to a conference center or whatever it is like that, I mean, that's easy, right? Kind of it's fine. I mean, I'm just going to go somewhere different, but kind of the whole process of actually getting out of the house and going to do something, and I think that remains a pretty heavy lift. So it seems to me that you have kind of the upper crust of the conferences, and they're starting to rebound, I think, kind of reasonably nicely. I mean, we'll see, right? I mean, is RSA going to be what it used to be? Probably not, right? But is it going to be better than it was last year? Probably. So I think we're making some improvement, but I think a lot of the conferences that were kind of at the lower end of that, smaller, community events, kind of these road shows that go to, all these different cities. I think that's tough. I think that's tough nowadays.
So I do have something on my craw that I remembered to bring up, and we were talking about sort of the hype of robotics coming in, and now AI, generative AI. Yeah. What happened to 5G? I thought that was going to transform the world and the applications, and
I don't know.
We wouldn't need internet into our homes and all this BS.
It says on my phone I have 5G, but
I can't tell the difference. Can you tell that suddenly you're like?
I mean, speed test tells me it's faster.
It does. It probably got a little lower latency, but if there's killer apps for 5G, I don't think you don't read about it. I mean, certainly it's being deployed everywhere. It's just, to me, it's Seems like a better 4G. Maybe we just haven't hit that peak.
I will tell you, it does feel kind of magical to me if I'm, standing online somewhere or doing, whatever I'm doing, not in my house, that I can pull up, kind of TV wherever I want. Right. And I have sufficient bandwidth to do that. I don't have to be on Wi-Fi. I don't, that feels, impactful to me, but only from a personal, kind of convenience standpoint. It doesn't really help me do anything better. I'm not a better person because I can check out, kind of an ESPN, clip, while I'm standing in line, for my groceries. If anything, it makes me less, kind of in the moment and less aware of what's going on around me. But to me, that's how I kind of perceive, 5G. It's really taken a lot of the issue out of, kind of doing video wherever it is that I am. But in terms of new applications, in terms of anything along those lines, not so much.
Well, and I don't know where you live in relation to Atlanta city proper, but I'm kind of in the edge of the suburbs. You go in the grocery store, you go into Hobby Lobby, or you go into whatever. A lot of stores, you can't get any wireless, any cellular. Right. It's still a big issue, at least my experience.
Coverage around me is pretty good. In my specific house, I don't have strong enough coverage to want to get rid of my, 1G, kind of fiber connection, from the carrier. But it's around Atlanta. It's pretty good. So that's, that's been helpful. But again, I don't perceive any of those things. But again, it's one of these things where, the hype machine has got a hype. So now the hype machine is around AI, and we'll go.
It was hyped for a long time before it rolled out.
One of the sometimes there's stuff that comes out and that you're just jealous you didn't come up with. So Gartner's hype cycle, I love, right? Because it's so apropos to everything that we've just seen. And, when 5G is down, kind of, I'm not sure if it's the trough of disillusionment yet, but it's probably pretty close, where generative AI and other AI things are, close to the top of the hype cycle now. And we're inevitably going to, ride it down when, folks are really trying to figure out what to do. And as we've talked about before, things like DevOps, right? They're starting to go up towards, the plateau of productivity, and that we're not talking about it anymore. Folks are just doing it. Right. And we're kind of focused on the edges of how do we refine it? How do we, kind of make it a little bit better? So I think that's a perfect model for how technology markets and hot environments, really kind of play out. And, we're just riding the roller coaster again with AI. And at some point it will transform things, and 5G, kind of down there. I think it does provide some pretty cool, kind of use cases, but limited, right? Not universal. And I think that's where the hype machine goes wrong.
Yeah, I love their hype cycle too. And before they came out with it, I had this mental model of, well, things go for about a year and a half, and then the next thing takes over it. Right now, I think it's a lot quicker than that for many things. But you could see the hype. You could see everybody's doing it. You could see then that's not it. Let's go after the next, hot potato or whatever it is. Yeah. So, all right. So we got generative AI. We got cellular coverage.
Exactly. We got all that conferences. So once you connect 5G to ChatGPT, then magic is going to happen, right? So
that's Skynet.
That's throw a little bit of DevOps in there, and we're all good.
There you go. That's when the robot.
So with that, a couple of things. Mitch, you had mentioned, RSAC, so we will be there. So if you are going to the RSA conference, we're having our DevSecOps days again. I know somebody maybe on this show is going to be keynoting the event. So
there's something I can't remember his name.
Yeah, something like that will be the keynote speaker there. So come see us. It'll be great to see everybody. And really, I missed it last year. I'm looking forward to that. But before that, shorter term issue. If you happen to be in the Singapore area, we will be there in, I think it's 2 weeks from today, Mitch. Holy crap. 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, 2 weeks from today. You're right.
Is the DevOps Asia Summit in Singapore. So come see us there. And we've got Techstrong Con, right? So March 16th, Techstrong Con. Sign up for it. It's going to be, really a great show. We're going to talk about a lot of this stuff a lot deeper. So, come see us there virtually anyway.
And KubeCon is the week before in Amsterdam. We'll be there, or the week.
That's right. Alan and Mike Vizard will be there for KubeCon.
Mm-hmm. A lot of things going on. So,
a lot going on.
Keeping us busy. Keeping those airline miles racking up.
Exactly. All right. So with that, we will sign off from this week's Techstrong Research Review. We'll be back next week to talk about something else that is of critical importance.
Absolutely. At least to us anyway.
To us.
Great, everybody. We'll talk to you
Have
soon.
a great week.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Rajesh Dinadayalan, who is Director of Cloud Security Services for Hitachi Vantara. And we're going to be talking about DevSecOps and cloud security in general and the state thereof. Rajesh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I feel like we've been talking about this topic for a very long time, but it's not clear to me that progress is being made, and maybe it's just harder than people realize. But we're talking about shifting things left towards developers, but sometimes we don't give them the tools. And when they do put stuff up in the cloud, there's a lot of misconfigurations because people don't exactly know what they're doing with all those APIs. So what is your sense? I mean, am I being too pessimistic, or is progress being made, or do we just have a long way to go still?
Yeah, I think the progress is being made. So DevSecOps is still evolving within the industry, and there are different ways in which people pursue DevSecOps, right? So through HARC Cloud Security Services, we take a holistic approach towards the DevSecOps using our modern security framework. So our DevSecOps framework is built using a security by design and security by default approach. So what we mean by that is, taking a shift left and a shift right strategy within the DevSecOps framework.
So how does that work exactly? Is it a cloud service or a framework with some built-in tools that is tied into my DevOps workflow, or how exactly does one take advantage of this?
Yes. So just to give a background, so HARC is Hitachi Application Reliability Center, so which is a confluence of finest engineering talent, tools, processes, framework, everything coming together to operate cloud workloads in a much more secure and modern way. So it's a combination of multiple things, and the primary focus is how modern workloads can be effectively operated in the cloud from a resiliency, from a security and cost standpoint.
So is that essentially a managed service that you guys are managing on behalf of the customer, who's then building the applications per se, but you're taking care of all the infrastructure management and the workflows around that?
Absolutely, yeah. It is a managed services where we manage end-to-end operations for customers.
Do you think more people are starting to consume DevOps as a managed service because it's getting a little more complex out there with all the security concerns? Historically, a lot of people have built this stuff themselves. So what's your sense of how many organizations are going to shift to a managed service?
Absolutely. I think as we talk to customers, what we hear from them is they look at cloud security as one of the major concerns as they move their workloads into the cloud. This is because they think cloud security is complex because of the agile nature of the cloud that brings in a lot of cloud misconfigurations, and especially as they adopt more modern services like microservices, containers, Kubernetes, especially across a multi-cloud environment. So this the notion of security and compliance, becomes much more complex for cloud. So for customers. So customers look forward to managed services providers, certainly, who bring in that engineering talent and skill set to effectively manage security on the cloud.
Do you think that that conversation is going to be forced more because people are aware of the misconfigurations in the cloud and the vulnerabilities? There's a lot more talk about software supply chains. So has this conversation been kicked up a few levels in organizations? So it's not just the development team, but it's the security people and the C-level suite are all part of a bigger conversation.
Absolutely, I think it is definitely multiple teams coming together and talking about this approach, because DevSecOps by itself is how different teams come together and collaborate, in a collaborative manner, right? To bring that security joint ownership across the development team, the IT team, as well as the security team. So what we are seeing is DevSecOps is evolving in the industry, and the security team requires to work much closely with the development team to bring that collaborative approach.
What is it that you see organizations doing that makes you shake your head and go, geez, I just wish we would all kind of understand one or two basic concepts and maybe we'd be a lot further down the path?
So talking about, through our DevSecOps methodology, we take a multi-level defense approach. So what we mean by that is, how security can be enforced across the entire digital infrastructure, right, or the entire digital estate. So, and we call it as the 5C security model. So, which is security across cloud, containers, clusters, customer data, as well as code. So, when we say cloud, how do we ensure security across the infrastructure and the platform? And customers have challenges in understanding the shared responsibility model when it comes to security between the CSPs and what customers have to do. So, yeah.
Do you think we're going to see a lot more regulations coming down the pike? Because we are seeing a lot more interest for securing software supply chains. And is that going to have some sort of impact on how we think about DevSecOps?
Absolutely. I think especially with the evolving threat landscape and which so much of threat and new attack vectors that are happening in the industry, the regulatories are also continuously changing their compliance requirements. They are strengthening their compliance requirements, frequently. This also becomes another major challenge for customers in keeping up with their, compliance changes in the cloud.
Of course, we hear about the skills shortage all the time when it comes to anything to do with security. Do you think that that's also pushing people more towards a managed services mindset?
I think absolutely. So one of the key challenges which the industry as a whole has is the shortage of the cyber skill set, and that becomes a major challenge for customers, because the one primary reason why customers look at cloud security as complex is because they don't have the right engineering skill set to handle it. So with the right talent, cloud security in fact becomes much more effective in terms of enforcing a security because of its software defined nature. So I think that's one of the reasons why customers are really looking forward to managed services, to get that engineering talent who can effectively manage security for them.
Of course, we hear a lot about AI these days. Will AI save us from ourselves? What's your sense of what's the state of the art with AI and security these days?
I think AI and ML is going to play a major role in security space, because security, of course, is all about huge amount of data, and security is also continuously evolving. So machine learning and AI techniques plays a key role in terms of identifying anomalous behavior, new patterns that are happening in the security, in order to be much more proactive and efficient in terms of mitigating or protecting against these data breaches.
So looking into your crystal ball for 2023, what do you think we're going to see? What do you expect to happen? And what should people be prepared for?
I think the good part is that now customers are realizing that security is extremely important, especially in their DevOps, and that is why DevSecOps is gaining more and more attention. And in fact, when we were talking to one of the customer business team engaged us for doing a DevSecOps implementation. And as we speak to them, we understand that what happens is, they develop their software, and then when it goes to the release, their security team comes in, which is a thin, small team. They find out all vulnerabilities and then send the developers back, to fix it. So they were losing so much of time. So they wanted to take a DevSecOps approach to ensure that security is, adopted much earlier in the life cycle. So I think customers are really understanding the importance of security, and especially DevSecOps and the shift left approach that they should take.
Do you ever think that we will no longer need the term DevSecOps because security will just be part and parcel of the whole thing from the beginning, and maybe we don't need as cumbersome kind of terminology, or do you think it's DevSecOps to stay?
Maybe I think eventually this might change because one reason why it moved from DevOps to DevSecOps is because we wanted to emphasize the importance of security across the DevOps pipeline. So I would say this is still in an evolving phase, but once the security becomes an integral part of the process, whether it is setting up of an infrastructure or application development, security should become part of the design. So that's why in our services we call it as design for security, because security should not be an afterthought or a bolt-on tool that comes in later in the process. So when that maturity comes in the industry, maybe this term DevSecOps will change to something else.
All right, folks, I think we all know that there's a little bit of a dirty secret in this industry about how all these vulnerabilities are out there in production code, and there are some that we know about and many that we don't, but I got a feeling we'll be fixing them all as much as we can real soon. Hey, Rajesh, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Richard Henschel, who's the head of product management for Ansible at Red Hat. And we're going to be talking about natural language processing, AI, and the future of IT. Hey, Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Mike.
You guys kind of launched this a little while ago, and I guess everybody now wants to know, well, how far along are we? And especially in the age where ChatGPT is all the conversation these days, people want to know, well, just what do we think is going to happen as all this stuff gets applied to the way we manage IT, not just everything else in our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was very timely, wasn't it? At the tail end of last year, there was a massive surge in the interest around this topic, and ChatGPT certainly helped. So, like I say, we announced Ansible Wisdom, last year, Ansible Fest in October. This is very much how do we bring the power of AI into the creation of Ansible automation content for users. And I think a lot of people had why would I want this? Why would I have this? I think nothing else, ChatGPT has shown exactly why people want this, what the power and the possibility is. And the way I often think of these things is, we've spent many years thinking about how AI could replace what the worker does, what the user does. But actually now the power of the capabilities is really about how does AI augment what the user can actually achieve and what they can do. And this is what we're trying to bring to Ansible, because there's a natural fit. Ansible is a language, is there for a purpose, for a task. It's a simplified language. It's very natural in its way that you interpret it. You'd say, I would like Ansible to do X, Y, and Z, right, to make my life work. That's how you ask the question when you say, hey, automate a VM to build this in this location at this size. You're doing the same type of activity. It's a natural fit for how those two work. And we also have a big community of users that rely on Ansible to help and do those simple tasks. We have the large scale corporate users that use the automation platform as a method for large scale automation practice, across their orgs, and you have those single users that just want to help, build something every once in a while. All of those users can gain the benefit of how, natural language processing in an AI model can make their lives easier.
Am I going to type in my request? How exactly will I interface with this? Or will it be more of a voice experience where I'll just come in and say, spin me up 14 virtual machines on this particular platform and everything will be taken care of?
I think the voice idea would be, it would seem nice in a film, but I think it's probably not practical for the way most people work. I think, the voice assistants have probably taught us that. No, very, very much more a type and how to use. And, the initial approach is very much, getting it into the workflow of the user. So through the sort of developer IDE type experience, in typically writing Ansible, you type out, we always try and say, describe what the task is that you're trying to achieve. Well, by describing the task, you're actually effectively asking the question to the model to say, this is the automation I would like to do. And I think it's probably worth seeing, the idea around what project wisdom is and what, Ansible wisdom will be is more than just the engine. It's more than just the language processing, the algorithm. It's the experience around that. It's about how you bring the totality of what a user wants to try and bring into the mix. So where they get to do it from. So, it's an API that you can talk to, but what about the testing? What about the validation? What about bringing the fine tuning of the model so we can actually attribute where the content comes from? Is it the content as ordained by the system administrator in the company? Is it from the community user? Is it from a partner? Is it from a technology provider? Did Cisco or F5 or IBM or whoever write that automation? Can it be trusted in the way you want? In some ways that some existing models don't quite allow.
So the writing of the automation, historically, at least, it's always felt like one of the challenges organizations had is the person creating the content was generally a specialist. They were often too busy to create the content, and they had this domain level of knowledge. Are we getting to the point now where it's also easier to create the content, but the whole thing becomes more accessible to a whole class of IT professionals that otherwise may not be the quote unquote high priest of IT?
Well, exactly that. I mean, I think, we've got past the point where the center of excellence model is the right model to take. That's always going to be a bottleneck. And that's always been one of the powers of Ansible, how to get that tooling into somebody's hands much more easily. You don't have to know a programming language. Of course, if you know a programming language, you can be much more powerful with the tooling than you can without it. But you still have to have that level of access. And so we've seen that, but you still have to know what you want to do, right? And I think this has been one of those areas where often people know what they want to do, but do they know how to make it happen in the tool in the most efficient way? And that's why I said that comment earlier about it being about augmenting the user rather than replacing the user. It's really about saying, I really know I want to create a virtual machine. I want to create an AWS. I want to create it here. I want to do it there. But I don't know all the syntax yet for how to do that. So how do I get them there faster? And then maybe at some point they move beyond the model, or maybe it just helps them become 2 or 3 times as efficient as they would be. So I really think that the emphasis on the augmentation of the user and then helping it to make that everything more accessible to a wider scope of users is a really big focal point for what we're trying to get to.
Do you think we're approaching a crisis of complexity? Because when I look at things, I see we have all these legacy monolithic applications that are being lifted and shifted into the cloud, and they still exist. And then we have all this cloud native stuff coming along, which is not nearly as easy to manage. And on top of that, there's multiple flavors of that. So we have, containers and serverless frameworks and WASM coming down the pike. So are we kind of looking at something here where, this could wind up being too much of a good thing?
It's certainly possible, right? Obviously, when you move into one of those new areas, people tend to fully invest and they go in and they leave behind those old things. But some of us, and this is my background before I joined Red Hat, I was a customer and I, had that architecture role. We were looking at all of that complexity. And it's always going to happen. I think that's always been the case. Yes, there's always seems like there's more complexity going forward, nevertheless. But I think that's probably been the same way for the past 40 or 50 years, right, in how these things are moving forward. But what if we could help tame that complexity? what if we could say, well, yeah, there's definitely things that need to move ahead at lightning pace, and off they go. How do we bring the older things? How do we bring the things in the middle? How do we help people get into that place faster, right? In a more efficient way? How do we optimize that experience for them? And I think that's where it opens up a new opportunity for us to also think, how do we supplement those people? How do we help with that complexity? Because it isn't going to go anywhere, but how do we make people successful with what they've got? And that's really where I think Ansel has a powerful play. And there's other tools in the same space. There's a lot of us thinking about the same stuff. It's all about that uplifting, that same complexity that we've got with the new capabilities. Well, how do we take those capabilities to apply them back to the older capabilities so that we don't leave them behind? Because most of those older systems, they're the ones that are driving, the actual core business intelligence that most organizations run on. You can't just replace all of those. You've got to marry that with the new and pull it forward. And it has to be looked at. Someone has to look at it holistically, right, as a group, right, while we let those others go off and strive for new, while we also help those others maintain the old. So there's that place to play in the middle that's about bringing those two areas together as well.
Things never seem to go away. What should people expect from AI as far as it is applied to IT operations as we go forward? There was a lot of initial hype in the category, and then there was skepticism, and now people are kind of seeing all these other models. So from your perspective, looking into your crystal ball for the coming year, what do you think we're going to see and experience?
Well, I say a big chunk of it is that how do we add, right, to what people do? How do we make their lives easier? But I think it opens us up to a bunch of other areas. Now, I've taught here very much this is about how do I get a bigger, broader bunch of people that maybe don't know what they need to know and bring them together and help get them on board. But then start thinking about, well, automation is there, and the operations tasks are there to deal with the routine, the repeating, repetitive tasks that we always have to try and achieve. How do we take them out of the way? And as we make it more accessible and easier for those things to be applied, then we also start to broaden and widen what we see as opportunities to have that same pattern applied for. And so I do think that in the move up into the operations is you've got two fragments to AI. You've got the creation of what you want to achieve, but you've also got that observability, the analytics. I think actually what we're doing with the creating automation, that becomes a really powerful sort of partner to the other existing AI that exists around observability, monitoring, analytics, detecting something that we think is wrong. Well, okay, now I can pass that instruction to a system that can potentially automate what the answer is that it wants to be, to either respond, remediate, discover what that can potentially be. And that's something we're starting to look at as we start to combine some of the other areas of Ansible that we're doing around event-driven automation, combining what Wisdom might be able to offer. But, think about the other sides as well, the ongoing maintenance, the ongoing planning for how we do that work. It's great, it's easy to write 1,000 automations, but then you've got to maintain them perpetually for you that those things also don't go away. Can the AI model be brought into that space? How does it help us maintain the automation and the code that we've created? How does it make that part of our lives easier so we can still keep focusing on the things that add value and taking away that sort of technical debt and churn that consumes our time as years go by?
How do we govern that? As one wag once said, it's one thing to be wrong, it's another thing to be wrong at scale. And with AI, we can be really wrong at scale. So how do we kind of get in that process and have confidence in it, or be able to do something that maybe intervene when we need to?
Yeah, well, my background will be given away by this statement, but there's still separation of duties, right, in some of these things. In my view of this, it's not all encompassed in one system, right? It has to be about bringing those different pieces together. So I want something to detect and understand. I need something with that knowledge. But I also have to have something that's there from a security, from a secure perspective, from a governance perspective, something that can be audited. And again, this mix of those two, having something that takes responsibility for that side of the organization, because that's what a lot of the IT operations teams historically always did. It was about making sure we had continuity of service, we had the quality and the expectation, the release the change management. But automating into that space, has to also be done if you want to automate and add all that value to the sort of the change agents of business where more revenue can be made, where business outcomes can be achieved. So marrying those two together, right, by having good systems that integrate well, that can talk to each other, that can show that, so you can build the trust, prove the trust, add decisioning capabilities in, add authorization capabilities in, so that will be the key to really making these things come together in the right way.
Years ago, we spent a lot of time worrying about the number of IT administrators per virtual machines or whatever else that we were measuring out there. But it seems like we can now manage IT at a level of scale that's not really tied to how many people we have. So how do I know whether I have the right level of IT investment per what measure these days? Or is that just a whole antiquated conversation to begin with?
I think it's going to differ based on operational models, but we're seeing, I think the more important thing is the skills gap. The number of administrators you've got, I think is less important than if you've got the right type of administrator with the right skills to achieve what you want. I think I was talking to somebody else about this recently, and DevOps has been very successful for many people, but it's also not been successful for many people. And I said, so it's both succeeded and failed, but ultimately it's where it failed. It also showed that there are people in that space, the reasons why DevOps came about, that friction between the development space and the operations space, the infrastructure teams came about. It's shown that there are people in that infrastructure team that can go to that next step. And then you get into the world of the platform engineer now and the SRE function. And so I think having the right skills in those teams and the right mindset for what you're trying to build and why you're trying to build something becomes more important than the number you have. Of course, you have to have enough, right, for the amount of work you want to try and do. But saying, I've got 1,000 to 1, well, 10 to 1 could be a bad ratio. And 1,000 to be a good ratio if the right skills exist in those individuals to automate correctly, scale, apply the right governance, the right process, the right security posture, all those things. And so I think the skills become the important part. And I think we're seeing a lot of challenges around the skills gaps that we've got. So which again, segues me back to my earlier point of how do we bring all those users up while succeeding in letting the other groups achieve what they're trying to achieve as well.
All right, so we're heading now into 2023. What's your best advice to folks? What's your crystal ball telling you for the year?
There's going to be a lot of change this year. I think there's a lot of external factors that are going to make people have to think about what they want to do. It might be challenging depending where we are, but I think there's opportunity with that as well. I think this is going to bring a focus and attention. Efficiency optimization is what I'm starting to see happen for people in my area in the automation space. What is the power there? Getting that value from what you're able to do, right? Bringing those skills to the fore, scaling them out, making it possible for everybody to gain as much advantage from that skill set. Skills are there to be, knowledge is there to be shared, right? Knowledge becomes something that we share with others, right? It becomes guidance to those others. How do I scale that guidance? It isn't by working harder, it's by working smarter, right? So.
All right, folks, you heard it here. As always, change is the only constant. Hey, Richard, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thanks for having me.
All right, and back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside our episode of the AI Times, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.